They laughed when she stumbled onto that auction block in chains, bleeding and broken, nothing more than property to be sold to the highest bidder. The crowd roared with cruel delight as men placed their bids, each one promising to teach her obedience, to break whatever spirit remained in those defiant eyes. But when a quiet rancher stepped forward with his silent son and spoke 5 words that changed everything, "My son needs you," the laughter died. What happened next in that dusty frontier town would challenge everything they believed about ownership, redemption, and what it truly means to be free. If you're ready to hear how one woman's darkest moment became her greatest liberation, stay with me until the end. And please, hit that like button and comment with your city so I can see how far Lena's story travels across the world. The sun beat down on Redstone Flats like the hammer of judgment itself, merciless and unforgiving. Heat waves shimmered above the packed dirt of Main Street, distorting the crude wooden platform that had been erected in the town square that morning. By noon, a crowd had gathered, ranchers in sweat-stained shirts, merchants abandoning their storefronts, women in faded calico dresses clutching parasols that offered little protection from the scorching New Mexico sun. They came for the spectacle. They always did. Lena Ashcroft felt every eye on her as rough hands shoved her forward, the iron shackles around her wrists cutting into already raw skin. She stumbled but caught herself, refusing to fall, refusing to give them that satisfaction. Blood trickled from a split lip where the deputy had struck her that morning when she had dared to ask where they were taking her. Her cotton dress, once white, now bore the stains of 3 days in a cell with no water for washing, dirt, sweat, and the rust-brown traces of her own blood. "Step lively now," Sheriff Garrett muttered behind her, his breath reeking of whiskey and tobacco. Folks paid good money to see this. Lena wanted to spit in his face. She wanted to scream that she wasn't livestock, that she was a human being with a name, with a life that had been stolen from her. But she'd learned in the past week that words only brought more pain. So she walked, head high despite the chains, toward the platform where her fate would be decided by strangers. The crowd parted as she climbed the 3 wooden steps, and the jeering began immediately. "Look at that one. Got some fight in her. Won't last long. Weak under a firm hand, she'll learn her place. I'll give $5 for her right now." Laughter erupted, cruel and hungry. Lena forced herself to look at them, to memorize the faces of the people who found entertainment in her suffering. There was Mrs. Henderson from the general store, the same woman who'd once complimented Lena's embroidery work. There was Tom Ridley, the blacksmith who'd danced with her at the town social just 6 months ago, back when she'd been a school teacher with a future, back before everything fell apart. How quickly they'd forgotten her, how easily she'd become invisible, then worse than invisible, visible only as something to be used and discarded. "All right, settle down." A man in a dusty suit climbed onto the platform beside her. Cornelius Vance, the town's so-called auctioneer, though everyone knew he was just a thief with a gavel. "We're here today on behalf of Mr. James Ashcroft's creditors. As you all know, Mr. Ashcroft departed this territory somewhat hastily, leaving considerable debts behind." A ripple of knowing laughter moved through the crowd. Lena's hands clenched into fists despite the shackles. Her brother James hadn't just departed. He'd fled in the night after a poker game went bad, after he'd put up his sister's teaching contract as collateral, after he'd gambled away everything their parents had left them. And when the debt came due, it wasn't James who'd been dragged from her boarding house. It was Lena who'd paid the price for his cowardice. "Now, the court has determined that Miss Ashcroft here bears responsibility for settling those debts," Vance continued, his voice rising with practiced showmanship. "Total amount owed, $863. Quite a sum. Therefore, under Territorial Law Section 47, she is to be placed into indentured service until said debt is satisfied." "That's not law!" Lena's voice cracked as she shouted. "That's slavery dressed up in legal words." A deputy moved forward, hand raised to strike her, but Vance waved him off. "Let her speak. Won't matter much longer anyway." "I'm a teacher," Lena said, her voice shaking but determined. "I had a contract with the school board. I had a life. My brother's gambling debts aren't—" "Your brother signed papers putting up your labor as security," Vance interrupted, pulling a folded document from his pocket and waving it like a flag. "All legal and proper. Judge Morrison reviewed it himself." Lena's stomach churned. Judge Morrison, who'd lost $50 to James the same night everything fell apart. Judge Morrison, who'd probably been happy to sign any document that helped his creditors' friends collect their money. Now then, Vance turned back to the crowd, rubbing his hands together. What do we bid for 5 years of this young woman's service? She can read and write, does needlework, can cook and clean, strong back, good teeth, a bit mouthy, but that can be trained out. $10, someone shouted from the back. 20, 25, and I'll make sure she learns respect. The bids came fast, each one like a nail in a coffin. Lena felt dizzy, her vision swimming in the harsh sunlight. This couldn't be happening. This was 1878, not 1778. Women had rights now, didn't they? But as she looked out at the crowd of faces, some jeering, some pitying, none intervening, she realized that rights only mattered if someone was willing to enforce them. $50. The voice cut through the chaos like a knife, and the crowd fell silent. A man pushed his way to the front, and Lena recognized him immediately. Thomas Blackwood, the richest cattle baron in 3 counties. He was a mountain of a man, 6 feet 4 inches of muscle and meanness, with cold gray eyes and a reputation for breaking horses and spirits with equal efficiency. 3 wives he'd had, and all 3 had either died or disappeared under circumstances nobody talked about openly, but everyone whispered about after dark. Blackwood climbed onto the platform with heavy boots, circling Lena like she was a horse he was considering purchasing. She stood perfectly still, refusing to flinch when he grabbed her chin and turned her face from side to side. "Bit scrawny," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "But I fattened up worse. She'll do for kitchen work and other duties." The implication in his words made several women in the crowd turn away. Lena jerked her chin from his grasp, earning a backhand that split her lip further. She tasted blood, but didn't make a sound. "Oh, she's got spirit," Blackwood laughed, a sound like grinding stones. "I like that. Makes the breaking more interesting." $60, another voice called out, but Blackwood shut it down immediately. $100, he said flatly, "and that's final. Anyone want to outbid me?" Silence. Lena felt her legs trembling, threatening to give out beneath her. $100 for 5 years of her life. 5 years of whatever this monster wanted from her. 5 years of $101. The voice was quiet, barely audible over the murmur of the crowd, but something in its tone made people turn. Lena couldn't see who'd spoken, but she watched Blackwood's face darken with anger. "Who said that?" the cattle baron demanded. The crowd parted slowly, and a man stepped forward. He wasn't particularly tall, maybe 5 feet 10, and he wasn't dressed in the fine clothes of a wealthy rancher. His shirt was clean but worn, his hat battered by sun and wind. He had the weathered look of someone who worked his own land, calloused hands and sun-lined face, speaking of long days under an open sky. But his eyes, when Lena finally met them, were different from every other man's in that crowd. They weren't measuring her worth or imagining her submission. They were simply seeing her as a person. Beside him stood a small boy, no more than 7 years old, clutching the man's hand with white-knuckled intensity. The child's face was solemn, his dark eyes enormous in a too-thin face. "I said $101, the man repeated, his voice still quiet but carrying clearly in the sudden hush. Blackwood laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You trying to be funny, Rowan?" "You know I want her." "I know," the man, Rowan, replied. "But you don't need her. My son does." The crowd erupted in confused muttering. Lena stared at this stranger who'd just bid on her future, trying to understand what was happening. The boy at his side hadn't spoken, hadn't made a sound, just kept staring up at his father with those haunted eyes. "Your son?" Blackwood's voice dripped with contempt. "What does a brat need with a woman?" "Someone kind," Rowan said simply. "Someone gentle, someone who knows what it's like to lose everything." For a moment, Lena forgot to breathe. This stranger somehow saw past the dirt and blood and chains to something deeper. But that was impossible. No one had really seen her in so long. Not since her parents died, not since James left, not since the world decided she was worth less than the debt owed by a coward. $150, Blackwood growled, his face reddening. $151, Rowan countered immediately. 200. 201! The bidding escalated, Blackwood's frustration growing with each calm counter from Rowan. The crowd watched in fascination, sensing that this was about more than just money, more than just acquiring labor. This was a battle of wills between two very different men. "You can't afford this, Rowan," Blackwood finally shouted. "You're barely keeping that pathetic ranch of yours running. What are you going to do when winter comes and you can't pay your own debts?" "I'll manage," Rowan said quietly. "I always do." $500. Blackwood's voice was nearly a roar now. "Final offer." Silence fell across the square. $500 was a fortune, more than most men in Redstone Flats made in 2 years. Lena saw the defeat in Rowan's eyes before he even spoke, saw his shoulders slump slightly as he glanced down at his son. $501, the boy whispered. Every head turned. The child's voice was so soft that some people weren't even sure they'd heard it, but his father had heard, and something fierce and protective crossed his face. "My son bids $501, Rowan said clearly, "and I stand behind that bid." "You've lost your mind," Blackwood snarled. "You don't have that kind of money." "I have my land," Rowan replied. "I have my cattle. I have everything I own, and I'll put it up as surety if I need to, but I'm not letting you have her." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Blackwood's hand moved toward the gun at his hip, and several people in the crowd gasped. But Rowan didn't flinch, didn't reach for his own weapon. He just stood there, his son's hand in his, facing down the most dangerous man in the county with nothing but quiet determination. Vance cleared his throat nervously. "Mr. Blackwood, do you wish to counter the bid?" For a long moment, Blackwood said nothing. His eyes moved between Rowan, the boy, and Lena, calculating. Then, slowly, deliberately, he smiled, and it was worse than his anger. "No," he said softly, "let the fool bankrupt himself. I can wait. Everything Rowan owns will be on the auction block by spring, including her. And when that happens, there won't be anyone to save her." He climbed down from the platform and pushed through the crowd, his men following. The threat in his parting words was clear to everyone, especially to Lena. This wasn't over. It was just postponed. "Sold," Vance declared, bringing his gavel down with a sharp crack. $501 to Caleb Rowan. Payment due within 30 days, or the contract reverts to the next highest bidder. 30 days. Lena's mind reeled. This stranger had just committed himself to financial ruin to prevent Blackwood from owning her. But what did that really mean? Had she just traded one kind of ownership for another? Caleb Rowan climbed onto the platform slowly, his son still clutching his hand. Up close, Lena could see the lines around his eyes, the gray threading through his dark hair. He was younger than he'd seemed from a distance, probably only in his mid-30s, but he had the worn look of someone who'd lived through more than his years. "Sheriff Garrett," Caleb said, not taking his eyes off Lena. "Remove her chains, please." "Now hold on," Garrett protested. "Standard practice is to keep him restrained until—" "Remove her chains." Caleb's voice didn't rise, but something in it made the sheriff pause. "She's not property, and I won't have her treated like it." "You just bought her contract," Garrett pointed out. "That makes her a person who deserves dignity," Caleb interrupted. "The chains. Now." Grumbling, Garrett produced a key and unlocked the shackles. The relief was immediate and overwhelming. Lena's wrists were raw and bleeding where the iron had cut into her skin, but the weight being lifted felt like breathing for the first time in days. "Thank you," she whispered, though she wasn't sure why she was thanking him. He'd just purchased her, after all. She was still owned, still bound, just by a different man. "Don't thank me yet," Caleb said quietly. "You haven't heard what I'm offering." Lena looked up at him, confused. What he was offering, as if she had a choice. "My ranch is about 5 miles northwest of town," Caleb continued, addressing her directly rather than talking over her like every other man today had done. "It's small, just me and Noah here, and my foreman Cruz. We run about 200 head of cattle, some horses. The work is hard but honest." He paused, seeming to search for words. "I know what the paper says. I know legally you're bound to me for 5 years to work off your brother's debt. But I'm not interested in owning anyone, Miss Ashcroft. What I'm interested in is giving my son a chance at something better than what he's had." Lena glanced down at the boy. Noah. He was staring at her with those enormous dark eyes, And she noticed now that there were old tear tracks on his cheeks, though he wasn't crying now. When had he last cried? And why did this child look like he carried the weight of the world on his small shoulders? Noah hasn't spoken more than a handful of words in over a year, Caleb said softly. Not since his mother died. The doctor says there's nothing physically wrong with him. He just stopped. Stopped talking, stopped smiling, stopped being a child. Lena felt something twist in her chest. She knew that kind of silence. She'd lived in it herself after her parents died, after the world proved itself to be crueler than she'd imagined possible. I need someone who understands that kind of pain, Caleb continued. Someone who won't push or demand or try to fix what's broken with force. Someone who knows that healing takes time and gentleness and patience. And you think that's me? Lena's voice came out harsher than she intended. A woman you just saw auctioned like livestock. What makes you think I have anything gentle left in me? Because you're still standing, Caleb said simply. Because when Blackwood hit you, you didn't cower. Because when they paraded you up here in chains, you kept your head high. That takes more than strength. That takes hope. And hope is what my son needs more than anything. Lena wanted to tell him he was wrong. Hope was what she'd lost on this platform. Hope was the luxury of people who still believed the world could be kind. But when she looked at Noah again, at this small boy who'd bid his father's entire livelihood for a stranger because some instinct told him she was needed, she found she couldn't quite form the words. Here's what I'm proposing, Caleb said, and now his voice dropped low enough that only she could hear. Come to the ranch. You'll have your own room, your own space. No one will touch you. No one will make demands. I need someone to help with the house, to make meals, to maybe spend time with Noah if he wants it. In exchange, you'll have food, shelter, safety. And at the end of 5 years, you'll be free of the debt, truly free. Why? The question burst from Lena before she could stop it. Why would you do this? Why risk everything for someone you don't even know? Caleb was quiet for a moment, his gaze distant. Because a year ago, I stood where Noah is standing now, lost, angry, drowning in grief, and not knowing how to save my own son. Someone helped me then, someone who had no reason to. And I learned that sometimes the best thing you can do for your own pain is to ease someone else's. He held out his hand, not to grab her, not to claim her, but offering. An actual choice, the first she'd been given since this nightmare began. Come with us, Miss Ashcroft. Not because you're owned, but because both you and my son need a safe place to heal. Let us be that for each other. Lena stared at his outstretched hand. Every instinct screamed at her to be suspicious, to assume the worst, to believe that this was just another form of captivity dressed up in kind words. Men didn't rescue women out of goodness. They took what they wanted and called it by prettier names. But then Noah stepped forward. The boy released his father's hand and reached up toward Lena, his small fingers stretching toward hers. He didn't speak, couldn't or wouldn't, it didn't matter. But his eyes said everything. Please, I need you. Don't leave me alone in the silence. And Lena, who thought she had no softness left, felt something crack open in her chest. She took Caleb's hand. His grip was firm but careful, mindful of her injured wrists. Thank you, he said quietly. I promise you won't regret this. Lena didn't answer. She couldn't promise him anything, couldn't even promise herself that she wouldn't run the first chance she got. But for now, for this moment, she let herself be led down from the auction block, away from the jeering crowd, toward a wagon waiting at the edge of the square. Behind them, the crowd dispersed, already moving on to the next bit of excitement, the next scandal to gossip about. The auction block stood empty in the blazing sun, but Lena could still feel the weight of the chains, the shame of being put on display, the terror of watching men bid for the right to control her life. Caleb helped her into the wagon with surprising gentleness, then lifted Noah up to sit between them. The boy immediately reached for Lena's hand, his small fingers wrapping around hers with surprising strength. It's about an hour's ride, Caleb said, taking up the reins. If you need to stop, just say so. Lena nodded but didn't trust her voice. As the wagon lurched into motion, carrying her away from Redstone Flats and toward an unknown future, she allowed herself one backward glance at the town that had betrayed her. Mrs. Henderson was already back in her store. Tom Ridley had returned to his smithy. The platform where she'd stood in chains was being dismantled by workers who whistled while they worked, as if nothing of consequence had happened there. She turned forward, fixing her eyes on the horizon where heat waves made the distant mesas shimmer like a mirage. Beside her, Noah's hand tightened in hers, a small anchor in a world that had proven itself fundamentally unstable. Maybe Caleb Rowan was different from the other men. Maybe his offer of safety was genuine. Or maybe this was just another kind of trap, and she was trading one master for another. But as the wagon rolled on through the desert heat, leaving the town and its cruelties behind, Lena made herself a promise. Whatever happened at that ranch, whatever this man actually wanted from her, she would survive it. She would endure it. And when her 5 years were up, she would walk away free. She'd learned the hard way that the world was cruel and that kindness was usually a mask for something darker. But she'd also learned that she was stronger than she'd ever imagined. Strong enough to stand in chains before a mocking crowd. Strong enough to lift her head even when everything inside her wanted to break. Strong enough to survive whatever came next. The wagon rolled on, carrying 3 damaged souls toward an uncertain future. Behind them, Redstone Flats shimmered in the heat, already forgetting the woman who'd been sold there. Ahead, the open land stretched endlessly, offering either salvation or just another kind of suffering. Lena didn't know which it would be, but for the first time in a week, she had the smallest, most fragile sliver of something she'd thought was lost forever. She had a choice in what happened next, and that, she was learning, was worth more than any amount of freedom that could be bought or sold. The wagon wheels carved tracks through red dust as they left Redstone Flats behind, the town shrinking to nothing more than a dark smudge on the horizon. Lena sat rigid on the wooden bench, every jolt and bump sending fresh pain through her bruised body, but she refused to show weakness. Noah's hand remained clasped in hers, his grip surprisingly strong for such a small child, as if he feared she might vanish if he let go. Caleb drove in silence, his eyes fixed on the winding trail ahead. The landscape stretched out in all directions, endless red earth punctuated by scrub brush and the occasional twisted juniper, mountains rising purple in the distance. It was beautiful in a harsh, unforgiving way, and Lena found herself wondering if that's what she'd become. Beautiful only in the way that broken things sometimes are, when you learn to survive despite the breaking. "There's water in the canteen behind you," Caleb said, after they'd been traveling for perhaps 20 minutes. His voice was quiet, careful not to startle. "And some biscuits wrapped in cloth. You must be hungry." Lena was hungry. She hadn't eaten since yesterday morning, but her stomach was knotted too tight to accept food. "I'm fine," she said, though her voice came out rougher than she intended. "You're not fine." Caleb didn't look at her, keeping his attention on the horses. "And that's all right. You don't have to pretend with us." The words hit harder than they should have. Lena had been pretending for so long, pretending she could handle James's drinking, pretending she didn't notice the way men looked at her after her parents died and she had no protection, pretending that teaching school would be enough to build a life on. And then, when everything collapsed, pretending she wasn't terrified every single moment of those 3 days in the cell, waiting to learn her fate. Noah tugged on her hand gently, and when she looked down, he was pointing to the canteen. His dark eyes were insistent, worried. For some reason, this child's concern undid something in her that all the cruelty hadn't managed to touch. Her hand shook as she reached for the water. The first sip was heaven. The second made her realize how desperately thirsty she'd been. She drank deeply, water spilling down her chin, not caring about propriety or manners. When she finally lowered the canteen, she found both Caleb and Noah watching her with matching expressions of relief. "Better?" Caleb asked. Lena nodded, not trusting her voice. She unwrapped the cloth bundle and found 2 biscuits, still slightly warm. She broke off a piece and offered it to Noah, who shook his head and pointed at her mouth. "Eat." She obeyed, and the simple act of chewing, swallowing, taking something into her body that wasn't pain or fear made her eyes burn with unexpected tears. "Thank you," she managed. "It's just biscuits," Caleb said softly. "You don't need to thank me for basic decency." But she did, because basic decency had been in short supply lately. She finished the first biscuit in silence, watching the landscape change as they traveled northwest. The trail wound through shallow arroyos and across flat stretches where nothing grew except stubborn patches of desert grass. Occasionally, they passed other signs of human habitation. A distant ranch house, a line of fence posts, a windmill spinning slowly against the cloudless sky. "Tell me about your ranch," Lena said finally, needing to fill the silence with something other than her own spiraling thoughts. Caleb seemed to consider his words carefully before speaking. "It's not much by some standards. My father started it 30 years ago with nothing but determination and a land grant. 200 acres, though only about half of that is usable grazing land. We've got a decent well, which is worth more than gold out here. The house is small but solid. My father built it to last." "And your foreman?" "Cruz, you said?" "Cruz Mendoza. He's been with my family since I was Noah's age. Saved my life more than once when I was young and stupid." Caleb's mouth quirked in something that wasn't quite a smile. "He's the best hand with cattle I've ever seen, and he's been keeping the ranch running this past year when I've been distracted." By grief, Lena understood. By trying to care for a son who'd stopped speaking, stopped living in any meaningful way. She glanced at Noah, who was watching the horizon with those two old eyes, and wondered what he'd seen. What had his mother's death been like? Sudden or slow? Violent or gentle? The questions burned on her tongue, but she swallowed them. Some stories needed to be offered, not demanded. "What about you?" Caleb asked, startling her. "What were you before all this?" "A teacher," Lena said, and heard the bitterness creep into her voice. "For 3 years, I taught reading and arithmetic to children aged 6 to 12. I was good at it too. The school board renewed my contract every year." "What happened?" The simple question opened a floodgate. "My brother happened. James always had a weakness for cards and whiskey, but after our parents died, it got worse. He gambled away our inheritance in 6 months. Then he started borrowing money, putting up things that weren't his to wager, our house, my mother's jewelry, eventually my teaching contract." Her voice hardened. "The night it all fell apart, he was in a game with some of the richest men in town. Judge Morrison, Thomas Blackwood, the banker. He was winning at first, or so he told me later. Then his luck turned, and instead of walking away, he kept playing. He put up everything we had left, including a promissory note that said I would work off any debts he couldn't pay." "That can't be legal," Caleb said, his jaw tightening. "It is if the judge says it is. And Judge Morrison was one of the men at that table. He signed the papers himself, made it all official. Then James ran. Didn't even tell me he was leaving, just disappeared in the middle of the night. When the creditors came calling 3 days later, I was the only one left to pay." The words poured out of her now, a poison that needed to be drained. "They dragged me from my boarding house at dawn. Mrs. Peterson, my landlady, watched from her window and didn't say a word. The sheriff locked me in a cell with drunks and thieves, and nobody came. Not the school board, not the families whose children I'd taught, not anyone. For 3 days I sat in that cell wondering what would happen to me. And then today they chained me and put me on that platform like I was livestock." Her voice broke on the last word. Noah's hand squeezed hers again, offering what comfort a 7-year-old could give. "I'm sorry," Caleb said quietly. "I'm sorry that happened to you. I'm sorry the world failed you so completely." Lena swiped at her eyes with her free hand. "Sorry doesn't change anything." "No," he agreed. "But maybe what comes next can." They rode on in silence for a while longer. The sun climbed higher, beating down with relentless intensity, but Caleb angled the wagon to keep Lena and Noah in the shade of the canvas cover as much as possible. Small kindnesses, Lena was learning, said more than grand gestures. Finally, as they crested a low rise, Caleb pointed ahead. "There. That's home." Lena followed his gaze and saw a cluster of buildings nestled in a shallow valley where a line of cottonwood trees suggested water. The main house was low and sprawling, built from adobe with a covered porch running along the front. Behind it stood a barn, a corral with several horses, and what looked like a bunkhouse. It was simple, weathered, but well-maintained. Someone cared about this place. As they drew closer, Lena spotted a man working near the barn. Tall and lean, with silver-streaked black hair tied back from his weathered brown face. He looked up at the sound of the wagon and set down the saddle he'd been oiling. "That's Cruz," Caleb said. "He's going to be surprised." That was an understatement. As Caleb pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house, Cruz approached with long strides, his dark eyes moving from Caleb to Lena to Noah with poorly concealed confusion. Jefe, Cruz said, his voice carrying a trace of an accent. You were supposed to go into town for supplies. I got something more important, Caleb replied, climbing down from the wagon. He came around to help Lena, offering his hand. She hesitated, still unused to being treated with consideration, but finally accepted. Her legs nearly buckled when she stood. 3 days in a cell, followed by an hour on a hard wagon bench, had left her stiff and aching. Caleb steadied her with a hand on her elbow, then turned to Cruz. This is Miss Lena Ashcroft. She'll be staying with us. Miss Ashcroft, this is Cruz Mendoza, the man who actually runs this ranch. Cruz's expression shifted through several emotions too quickly for Lena to track, finally settling on careful neutrality. Welcome, señorita. His eyes dropped to her split lip, her bruised wrists, the bloodstains on her dress. When he looked at Caleb again, there was a question in his gaze. It's a long story, Caleb said. Let's get her inside first. She needs water, food, and a place to rest. See, of course. Cruz stepped forward, and Lena instinctively flinched. He froze immediately, raising his hands in a gesture of peace. Lo siento. I'm sorry. I only meant to help with the boy. Noah had already scrambled down on his own and was standing close to Lena, his hand reaching for hers again. The child seemed to have appointed himself her guardian, which would have been touching if it wasn't so heartbreaking. Cruz led the way to the house, and Caleb gestured for Lena to follow. The front door opened into a large main room that served as both kitchen and living area. It was surprisingly clean for a house with no woman in it. Someone had been making an effort. A long wooden table dominated the center of the space, surrounded by mismatched chairs. A stone fireplace took up most of one wall, and shelves lined another, holding dishes, books, and various tools and supplies. Your room is through here, Caleb said, crossing to a door on the far side of the room. It used to be a guest room. He opened the door to reveal a small but comfortable space, a narrow bed with a simple quilt, a dresser with a chipped mirror, a chair by the window. It wasn't much, but after 3 nights in a cell, it looked like paradise. There's a pump out back for water, Caleb continued. We heat it on the stove if you want a bath. There should be some... He paused, something painful crossing his face. Some dresses in the dresser. They might fit you. You're welcome to use anything you need. Lena understood immediately. These had been his wife's things. The room, the dresses, the careful way he couldn't quite look at the space. This had been kept empty, preserved like a shrine, and now he was offering it to a stranger. I don't want to intrude, she said quietly. You're not. Caleb's voice was firm. Sarah would have wanted her things used. She would have wanted someone to have this room. She was... He stopped, swallowed hard. She was kind that way. Noah had slipped past both of them into the room and was now sitting on the edge of the bed, looking up at Lena with those enormous dark eyes, waiting to see what she would do. Whether she would stay or run. All right, Lena said, making the decision. Thank you for the room, for the clothes, for all of it. Or, Cruz will bring in some hot water, Caleb said. Take your time. Rest if you need to. We'll have supper around sunset. He started to leave, then paused in the doorway. Miss Ashcroft? You can lock this door from the inside. There's a bolt. Use it if it makes you feel safer. No one will bother you. I give you my word. But I know words don't mean much right now, so lock the door. You're safe here. Then he was gone, pulling the door closed behind him. Lena stood frozen for a moment, then crossed to the door and examined it. Sure enough, there was a solid iron bolt. She slid it home, hearing it click into place, and felt something in her chest unclench slightly. Noah was still sitting on the bed, watching her. She should probably send him away, tell him she needed privacy, but something about his silent presence was comforting rather than intrusive. He'd chosen her somehow, in that crowd. Put his father's entire livelihood on the line for her. The least she could do was let him sit with her for a while. She sank into the chair by the window, every muscle in her body suddenly screaming with exhaustion. Through the glass, she could see Caleb and Cruz standing by the wagon, deep in conversation. Cruz's hands moved expressively, clearly asking questions. Caleb's responses were quieter, more controlled, but she could see the determination in the set of his shoulders. A knock came at the door, and she tensed. "Miss Ashcroft?" Cruz's voice came through the wood. "I have hot water for you. I'll leave it by the door." She waited until she heard his footsteps retreat, then slid back the bolt and retrieved the large bucket of steaming water. It took 2 more trips to fill the basin on the dresser enough for a proper wash. When she finally slid the bolt home again, Noah had curled up on the bed, his eyes drifting closed despite his obvious effort to stay awake. "You can sleep," Lena told him softly. "I'm not going anywhere." She didn't know if she was telling the truth or not, but it seemed to be what he needed to hear. His eyes closed fully, and within minutes, his breathing had evened into sleep. Alone, or as alone as she could be with a sleeping child in the room, Lena finally allowed herself to break. She stripped off her ruined dress, letting it fall to the floor in a heap. The hot water in the basin was the most beautiful thing she'd seen in days. She wet a cloth and began to wash, slowly, carefully, trying to remove not just the dirt and blood, but the memory of hands grabbing her, of being put on display, of being measured like livestock. When she caught sight of herself in the mirror, she almost didn't recognize the woman staring back. Dark circles shadowed her eyes. Her cheekbone was swelling from where Blackwood had struck her. Her split lip had stopped bleeding but looked awful. Bruises colored her arms, her shoulders, her wrists where the shackles had cut deep. But underneath all the damage, she was still herself. Still Lena Ashcroft, who'd read every book in her parents' library by the time she was 14, who'd taught reading to 36 children and loved every frustrating, wonderful moment of it, who'd survived her parents' death, her brother's betrayal, and today's humiliation. She was still here, still breathing, still fighting. She opened the dresser drawers and found them carefully organized, dresses, undergarments, stockings, all neatly folded and smelling faintly of lavender. She chose a simple blue calico dress that looked like it might fit and put it on carefully, her bruised body protesting every movement. It was slightly too big in the waist and slightly too small in the shoulders, but it was clean and whole, and that was more than she'd had an hour ago. By the time she'd finished dressing and had done what she could with her tangled hair, Noah was stirring. He sat up slowly, rubbing his eyes, and looked around the room as if surprised to find himself there. Then his gaze found Lena, and relief flooded his small face. "I'm still here," she said gently, and was rewarded with the tiniest quirk of his mouth. Not quite a smile, but close enough to matter. A knock came at the door, different from before. Caleb's voice this time. "Miss Ashcroft? Supper's ready if you're hungry. No pressure, but there's a plate waiting if you want it." Lena looked at Noah, who had slid off the bed and was standing by the door, clearly waiting for her decision. She could stay in this room, safe behind the bolt, and no one would blame her. Or she could take the next step, whatever that meant. She slid back the bolt and opened the door. Caleb stood in the main room, and something in his expression shifted when he saw her. Relief, maybe, or just acknowledgement that she'd chosen to join them rather than hide. "The dress fits well enough," he said quietly. "Sarah would be glad." The table was set with 3 plates. No, 4, Lena realized. Cruz was there too, standing near the stove with a careful neutrality that suggested he still didn't quite know what to make of this situation. But the food smelled incredible. Beans, cornbread, some kind of meat in a savory sauce. "Please sit," Caleb gestured to a chair. "Cruz is the real cook around here. I can barely manage not to burn water." "This is true," Cruz said, his mouth quirking. "Last month he nearly set the barn on fire trying to heat coffee." Lena found herself sitting at the table, Noah immediately claiming the chair beside her. Caleb and Cruz took their own places, and for a moment no one spoke. Then Cruz began passing dishes, and the strangeness of it all hit Lena fully. Here she was, hours after being sold on an auction block, sitting at a table with 3 men like she was a person who mattered. "How long have you two known each other?" Lena asked. Needing to break the silence with something normal, something that didn't involve chains or auctions or the weight of unpayable debts. Cruz glanced at Caleb before answering. "Since he was 7 years old. His father hired me when I came north from Sonora with nothing but the clothes on my back and a decent hand with horses. Don Carlos, he saw something in me I didn't see in myself." "Cruz taught me everything worth knowing," Caleb added, passing the cornbread to Lena. "How to read the weather, how to tell when a cow's about to calve, how to survive out here when the land wants you dead. I taught you how not to get yourself killed doing stupid things, Cruz corrected, which you still do anyway. There was affection in the banter, the ease of two men who'd weathered decades together. Lena found herself relaxing slightly, the food warm and solid in her stomach, the conversation flowing around her without demanding her participation. Noah ate methodically, still silent, but he kept glancing at her as if checking to make sure she was real. "Miss Ashcroft," Caleb said after a while, his tone shifting to something more serious. "We should talk about expectations, about what happens next." Lena's hand tightened on her fork. Here it came. The demands, the rules, the truth beneath the kindness. "I meant what I said in town," Caleb continued, his eyes steady on hers. "You're not a servant here. You're not property. But I also understand that the legal paper says otherwise, and that puts you in an impossible position. So let me be clear about what I need and what I'm offering." He set down his own fork, giving her his full attention. "What I need is someone Noah feels safe with. Someone who can help around the house, cooking, cleaning, the daily work that Cruz and I aren't great at managing. Someone who won't demand more from him than he can give." "And what you're offering," Lena kept her voice steady. "Your own room with a lock on the door, 3 meals a day, safety from anyone who might come looking to collect on that debt. And at the end of 5 years, you walk away free and clear with whatever money I can scrape together as payment for your work." "That's not how indentured contracts work," Lena said quietly. "The law says you own my labor until the debt is paid. There's no requirement for you to pay me anything beyond room and board." "Then I'm changing the terms." Caleb's voice was firm. "I don't care what the paper says. You're a human being, not livestock, and you deserve to be compensated for your work." Cruz was watching this exchange with something like approval in his dark eyes. Noah had stopped eating, his attention fixed on Lena's face, reading emotions that even she didn't fully understand yet. "Why?" The question burst from her again, the same one she'd asked in town. "Why do this? You could have let Blackwood have me. You could have walked away. Why risk your ranch, your son's future for a stranger?" Caleb was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with old pain. "A year ago, my wife Sarah got sick. Fever that came on sudden and wouldn't break. We tried everything, the doctor, herbs, cooling baths, prayer. Nothing worked. She burned up from the inside over 3 days, and there wasn't a damn thing I could do to save her." Noah's small hand crept across the table to grip his father's, and Caleb held on like it was the only thing keeping him anchored. "Noah watched his mother die," Caleb continued. "Heard her coughing at night, saw the way she got weaker every day. The last thing she said to him was that she loved him and that she'd always be watching over him. Then she stopped breathing and he stopped talking. Just stopped. Haven't heard more than a handful of words from him since, until today when he bid for you." Lena felt tears pricking her eyes, but refused to let them fall. This grief was theirs, not hers to share, but the weight of it pressed against her chest anyway. "After Sarah died, I fell apart," Caleb admitted. "Let the ranch slide, couldn't take care of Noah properly, couldn't see past my own pain. Cruz kept everything running, kept us fed, kept Noah safe when I couldn't manage it. And then one day, about 6 months ago, a family passing through got caught in a storm. Their wagon broke an axle right near our property line." He paused, swallowing hard. "They had 3 kids, all soaked and shivering. The mother was pregnant and looked ready to drop. I wanted to send them away, didn't want strangers in the house. Didn't want to be reminded that other people still had families while mine was shattered. But Cruz brought them inside anyway. Made me help. Made me see past myself. We sheltered them for 3 days while the father fixed their wagon." Cruz picked up the story. "The children, they played with Noah. Got him running around, almost laughing. The mother, she taught him a card game. For those 3 days, he was almost himself again. When they left, the father tried to pay me," Caleb said. "Didn't have much, but he wanted to give me something. I told him the only payment I needed was for him to do the same for someone else someday. To help when he could, even when it was hard, especially when it was hard." He looked directly at Lena now, his eyes clear and honest. "That's why I bid for you. Not because I'm some kind of saint, not because I expected anything from you, but because I know what it's like to need help, and to be drowning, and to have someone throw you a rope when they had no reason to. And because my son reached for you in that crowd, and he hasn't reached for anyone since his mother died." The words hung in the air between them, raw and real. Lena didn't know what to say, didn't know if there were words adequate for what she was feeling. Gratitude mixed with suspicion, mixed with hope, mixed with terror that this kindness would prove false, that she was setting herself up for another betrayal. "I won't lie to you," she said finally. "I don't know if I can be what Noah needs. I'm broken myself. I'm angry and scared, and I don't trust easily anymore. Maybe I can't trust at all." "That's all right," Caleb said simply. "Broken people understand each other better anyway." They finished the meal in silence after that, but it was a different kind of silence than before, less heavy, more contemplative. When the plates were cleared and Cruz excused himself to check on the horses one final time before dark, Lena found herself alone with Caleb and Noah in the warm lamplight of the main room. "I should help clean up," Lena said, standing. "Tomorrow," Caleb replied. "Tonight you should rest. You've been through hell today." Noah tugged on Lena's hand, then pointed toward her room. When she looked confused, he made a gesture like laying his head on his hands. "Sleep." "He's right," Caleb said with a small smile. "You look dead on your feet. Go rest. We'll still be here in the morning." Lena wanted to argue, wanted to prove she could pull her weight, but exhaustion was pulling at her like a physical force. She nodded and let Noah lead her toward her room. At the door, the boy released her hand reluctantly, his eyes questioning. "I'll be here in the morning," she promised him, though she wasn't entirely sure it was true. The urge to run, to get out before this turned bad, was still strong. But Noah's expression cleared slightly, and he nodded before heading toward what must be his own room. Lena closed her door and slid the bolt home. The bed called to her, and she sank onto it without even removing the borrowed dress. The mattress was softer than anything she'd slept on in days, the quilt clean and smelling of sun-dried cotton. Through the window, she could see stars beginning to emerge in the darkening sky, more stars than she'd ever seen in town where lamplight washed them out. She should be planning her escape, should be figuring out how to get away before the other shoe dropped, before Caleb's kindness revealed itself as something else. But her body was too tired, her mind too scattered, and somewhere deep inside a small voice whispered that maybe, just maybe, she didn't need to run. Not yet. Sleep claimed her quickly, pulling her down into darkness that was mercifully dreamless. She woke in the dead of night to the sound of screaming. Lena bolted upright, heart pounding, disoriented in the unfamiliar room. The screaming continued, high-pitched, terrified, unmistakably a child. Noah. She was on her feet and at the door before conscious thought caught up, sliding back the bolt and stumbling into the main room. Caleb was already there, coming from the opposite direction, hair disheveled and eyes wild with panic. They reached Noah's door at the same time, and Caleb threw it open to reveal the boy thrashing in his bed, sheets tangled around his small body, tears streaming down his face as he screamed without words. "Nightmare," Caleb said, his voice tight. "He gets them almost every night. Sarah's death. He relives it." He moved to the bed and gathered Noah into his arms, but the boy fought against him, still trapped in whatever horror his mind had conjured. Caleb held firm, rocking slightly, murmuring words Lena couldn't quite make out. But Noah's screams didn't stop, and his small fists beat against his father's chest with surprising force. Lena didn't think, just acted. She climbed onto the bed and wrapped herself around both of them, adding her arms to Caleb's embrace, her voice to his murmuring. "You're safe," she whispered against Noah's hair. "You're safe. You're safe. We've got you." Something in her voice, or maybe just the unexpected presence of another person, seemed to pierce through the nightmare. Noah's screams faded to sobs, and his struggling slowed. His small body was rigid with terror, but he was coming back to himself. "That's it," Caleb breathed. "Come back to us, son. You're safe. I'm here. Lena's here. You're safe." Gradually, incrementally, Noah relaxed. His sobs quieted to shuddering breaths, his fists unclenched, and then, in a movement that surprised them both, he turned away from his father and buried his face against Lena's shoulder, his arms wrapping around her neck with desperate strength. Lena looked at Caleb helplessly, not knowing what to do, but he just nodded encouragingly. She held the boy, feeling his heart gradually slow from its panicked gallop, feeling his breathing even out as the nightmare released its grip. Caleb kept one hand on Noah's back, maintaining contact, but allowing his son this choice. "Every night?" Lena asked quietly. "Most nights. Some worse than others." Caleb's face was haggard in the dim light filtering through the window. "The doctor said it might fade with time, but it's been a year and they're not getting better. Sometimes I think they're getting worse." "What does he dream about?" "I don't know for sure. He can't tell me. But I think he's back in the room with Sarah, watching her die again, being powerless to help her." Lena held Noah closer, this child who'd chosen her without knowing her, who'd sensed somehow that she understood his particular brand of brokenness. Maybe he'd seen it in her eyes on that auction platform. The knowledge that the world could be cruel, that loss could steal your voice, that sometimes surviving was the best you could do. "What do you usually do?" she asked Caleb. "Hold him until he falls asleep again. Sometimes it takes hours. Then I stay with him for the rest of the night in case he wakes again." He ran a hand through his hair, exhaustion evident in every line of his body. "I know it's not healthy, that I should be teaching him to self-soothe or whatever the doctor recommended, but I can't stand to leave him alone in the dark with his fear." "So don't," Lena said simply. "Stay with him. Let him know he's not alone." She shifted slightly, making room on the narrow bed. Caleb hesitated, clearly unsure about the propriety of all three of them in the same space, but Noah's grip on Lena tightened and the boy made a small sound of distress. "It's all right," Lena said quietly. "He needs both of us right now." Caleb carefully arranged himself on Noah's other side, and they formed a protective circle around the child. Noah's breathing had slowed to normal, though he still clung to Lena like she was the only solid thing in a shifting world. After a while, his grip loosened as sleep claimed him again. "Thank you," Caleb whispered across the space between them. "He doesn't usually calm down that fast." "Maybe he just needed something different," Lena replied. "Someone who isn't carrying their own grief quite so heavily." "You think I'm too close to it?" "I think you're a good father doing the best you can with an impossible situation. But maybe having someone else here, someone new, gives him permission to let go a little, to not have to be strong for you." Caleb was quiet for a long moment. "Sarah used to say that too, that Noah would hold himself together during the day because he could see how much I was struggling, that he needed space to fall apart without worrying about me." She sounds like she was wise. She was. She was everything I wasn't. Patient, gentle, always knew what to say. I don't know how to be both mother and father to him. I don't know how to fill that hole she left. "You don't fill it," Lena said softly. You stand beside it with him. You acknowledge that it's there and that it hurts and that it will probably always hurt. But you keep living anyway. Is that what you do? With your parents' deaths?" Lena nodded, though she wasn't sure he could see the gesture in the darkness. "Every day. Some days are easier than others. Some days I wake up and forget for just a moment that they're gone, and then I remember and it's like losing them all over again. But I keep going because that's what they would have wanted. Because giving up would mean their love for me ended with their deaths, and I won't let that be true." They lay there in silence, Noah sleeping peacefully between them, and Lena realized this was the first real conversation she'd had with another adult in weeks. Not transactions or accusations or demands, but actual communication, sharing of truths that mattered. "I'm glad you're here," Caleb said finally. "I know this isn't what you chose, and the circumstances were terrible, but I'm glad you're here." Lena didn't answer, couldn't answer, because she didn't know yet if she was glad or not. But she stayed, holding Noah in the darkness, and that felt like enough for now. She must have dozed because when she opened her eyes again, gray dawn light was filtering through the window, and Noah was awake, watching her with those enormous dark eyes. He didn't move, didn't speak, just studied her face like he was trying to memorize it. "Morning," she whispered, not wanting to wake Caleb, who was still deeply asleep on Noah's other side. Noah's mouth quirked in that almost smile again, and he reached up to touch her face gently, his small fingers tracing the bruise on her cheekbone with surprising tenderness. His expression was concerned, questioning. I'm okay, Lena assured him quietly. It looks worse than it feels. Noah didn't seem convinced, but he lowered his hand. Then, moving carefully so as not to disturb his father, he wriggled out from between them and tugged on Lena's hand. She followed him out of the room, closing the door softly behind them. The main room was quiet. The fire burned down to embers. Noah led her to the kitchen area and pointed to the coffee pot, then to the stove, then looked at her expectantly. You want coffee? She guessed. He shook his head and pointed at her, then the stove again, making a gesture of drinking. You want me to have coffee? Another head shake. You want to make coffee? Together? Finally, a nod. Lena smiled despite herself. All right, show me where everything is. For the next half hour, they worked together in companionable silence. Noah pointed out supplies, and Lana followed his guidance, building up the fire, filling the pot with water and grounds, setting it to boil. The boy moved with the confidence of someone who'd done this before, and Lena realized he must have learned from his mother. This was probably one of their routines, one of the memories he was clinging to. The smell of coffee brewing filled the room, rich and comforting. Lena found bread from last night's supper and cut slices for toasting. Noah produced butter from the cold box and a jar of preserves from a shelf. By the time Caleb emerged from Noah's room, hair standing on end and eyes still heavy with sleep, they had breakfast mostly ready. You didn't have to do this, Caleb said, though his gaze was fixed on the coffee pot with obvious longing. Noah wanted to, Lena replied. I just followed his lead. Caleb's expression softened as he looked at his son. Did you now? Taking care of our guest? Noah nodded solemnly, and for just a moment, Lena saw a glimpse of pride break through the grief on Caleb's face. This small act of normalcy, a child helping with breakfast, was a victory. Cruz joined them a few minutes later, stopping short when he saw the table already set and food prepared. Did I oversleep? Am I dreaming? Noah and Miss Ashcroft got an early start, Caleb explained, pouring coffee for everyone. Milagro, Cruz muttered, but there was approval in his eyes as he took his seat. They ate together, and Lena felt the strangeness of it all over again. Just yesterday morning, she'd been locked in a cell with no future. Now she was sitting at a family's breakfast table, helping to care for a grieving child, being treated like a person with value. It was disorienting, this kindness. She kept waiting for it to curdle into something else. After breakfast, as Caleb and Cruz headed out to start the day's work, Noah stayed close to Lena while she cleaned up. He helped dry dishes with a careful diligence that reminded her of her best students, children who took pride in doing things properly. Your father says you haven't been talking, Lena said conversationally as they worked. That must be hard. Having things you want to say, but the words won't come. Noah's hand stilled on the plate he was drying, but he didn't look at her. I understand that, Lena continued. Sometimes words feel dangerous. Like if you say certain things out loud, they become more real. Like if you talk about loss, you're somehow accepting it. The boy's eyes lifted to her face now, wide and questioning. But here's the secret, Lena said softly. Silence doesn't protect you from pain. It just means you're carrying it alone, and carrying things alone makes them heavier. Noah set down the plate carefully, then came to stand directly in front of her. He opened his mouth like he was trying to speak, but nothing came out. Frustration flickered across his small face. It's okay, Lena assured him. You'll talk when you're ready. But I'm here if you need someone to listen when that time comes. Noah nodded, then did something unexpected. He wrapped his arms around her waist and held on tight. Lena froze for a moment, uncertain, then carefully returned the embrace. This child barely knew her, had no reason to trust her, but somehow he'd decided she was safe. The responsibility of that trust felt immense. They were still standing like that when Cruz burst through the door, his face grim. Riders coming, he announced. 6 of them, led by Blackwood. Lena's blood turned to ice. She'd known this peace couldn't last, but she'd hoped for more than one night. Caleb appeared right behind Cruz, and his expression hardened when he heard the name. How far? 10 minutes? Maybe less? They're not hurrying, but they're not exactly friendly either. Take Noah to the back room, Caleb ordered, his voice tight. Both of you stay there until I come get you. No! Lena surprised herself with the firmness in her voice. She gently disentangled herself from Noah and stood straight. I won't hide. This is about me. I won't let you face it alone. Miss Ashcroft. Lena, she interrupted. If we're going to do this, call me Lena, and I'm not hiding. Caleb looked like he wanted to argue, but Cruz cleared his throat. She's right, Jefe. Hiding her would only make Blackwood more aggressive. Better to face this head on. Fine, Caleb relented, though clearly unhappy about it. But you stay behind me, both of you. He looked at Cruz. Get the rifle from the barn. Not to use, he added quickly, seeing Lena's alarm. Just to have. Blackwood respects force, even if it's not exercised. Cruz nodded and disappeared. Caleb crossed to a shelf and pulled down a gun belt, strapping it on with practiced efficiency. The weight of the pistol at his hip changed something about him. He looked harder, more dangerous. And Lena remembered that this was the frontier, where law was whatever you could enforce yourself. They went outside to wait, Noah pressed against Lena's side, her hand on his shoulder. Cruz returned with the rifle, taking a position near the porch. Caleb stood at the top of the steps, arms crossed, watching the trail where dust was beginning to rise in the distance. Whatever happens, he said without looking back at her. Whatever Blackwood says, remember that you're under my protection now. The contract is legally mine. He has no claim on you. Legal and right aren't always the same thing out here, Cruz observed grimly. No, Caleb agreed, but I'll make it clear anyway. The riders appeared over the rise, 6 men on horseback, Blackwood in the lead on a massive black stallion. They rode with the casual arrogance of people who'd never been told no, who'd never faced consequences for taking what they wanted. As they drew closer, Lena could see Blackwood's cold eyes fixed on her, and her skin crawled. They stopped about 20 feet from the porch, horses stamping and snorting. Blackwood sat easily in his saddle, one hand resting on his thigh near his gun, the other holding his reins. Rowan, he said, his voice deceptively pleasant. Beautiful morning, isn't it? What do you want, Blackwood? Now that's not very neighborly. Can a man pay a social call? Not when that man brings 5 armed riders with him. Blackwood's smile didn't reach his eyes. These are my men. I go nowhere without them. Surely you understand about wanting protection for your property. His gaze slid past Caleb to Lena, and she forced herself not to flinch. She's not property, Caleb said flatly. She's under legal contract to me for labor. Nothing more. Ah, yes, that contract, the one you can't possibly afford to honor. Blackwood leaned forward in his saddle. Word travels fast in these parts, Rowan. I know you put up everything you own as surety for that bid. Your land, your cattle, your very home. $500 you don't have and can't raise. I'll manage. Will you? Blackwood's voice turned sharp. How exactly? You're barely keeping this pathetic operation running as it is. You think you can scrape together $500 in 30 days? You'll be lucky to make enough to feed yourself and that mute boy of yours. Lena felt Noah tense under her hand, and Caleb's jaw tightened dangerously. My son is none of your concern, he said, his voice low and deadly. Everything in this county is my concern, Blackwood countered. And I'm concerned that you've made a promise you can't keep. When you default on that payment, that contract reverts to me as the next highest bidder, which means in 30 days she's mine anyway. I won't default. You will. You must. Blackwood's smile returned, cruel and confident. So why don't we save everyone some trouble? I'll pay you $200 right now for the contract. That's more than fair, double what you'd get at auction for this entire ranch. She's not for sale. Everything's for sale, Rowan. Everything has a price. Not her. Not to you. Blackwood's expression darkened. You're making a mistake, a costly one. When I take what's mine, and I will take it, you'll wish you'd been reasonable today. Get off my land, Caleb said quietly. Now. For a long moment, Blackwood didn't move. His eyes traveled over Lena again, then to Noah, then back to Caleb. The threat in his gaze was unmistakable. 30 days, Rowan, then we'll see how noble you feel when you're watching everything you love disappear. He pulled his horse around, his men following. Enjoy your little family while it lasts. They rode away at a casual pace, leaving nothing but dust and dread in their wake. Lena released a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding, her legs suddenly weak. He's right, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. You can't raise that money. You'll lose everything because of me. Caleb turned to face her, his expression fierce. I'll lose nothing. We'll figure something out. How? How can you possibly? I don't know yet. The admission seemed torn from him. But I'm not giving up, and I'm sure as hell not giving you to him. We have 30 days. That's enough time to find a solution. Cruz had lowered the rifle, but his expression was troubled. Jefe, he's not wrong about the money. Our margins are thin. Even if we sold every head of cattle we own, we'd barely make half what you owe. Then we'll find another way. What other way? Lena demanded, frustration and fear making her voice sharp. You've tied your entire future to a debt you can't pay. For a woman you don't even know. Why would you do that? Because it was the right thing to do. Caleb's voice rose to match hers. Because I couldn't stand there and watch you be sold to that monster. Because my son reached for you, and he hasn't reached for anyone or anything since his mother died. Because he stopped abruptly, running both hands through his hair. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter, but no less intense. Because I'm tired of standing by while bad things happen to good people. I'm tired of being too afraid or too broken to do what's right. Maybe I can't fix everything. Maybe I can't save everyone. But I could save you yesterday, so I did, and I'd do it again. Lena stared at him, this man who barely knew her but had risked everything anyway. She wanted to be angry at him for being foolish, for dragging his son into this mess, for putting them all in danger. But underneath the anger was something else. A tiny, fragile spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, there were still people in the world who acted out of goodness rather than greed. 30 days, she said finally. We have 30 days to figure this out. So let's not waste time arguing. Let's start planning. Caleb's expression shifted from frustration to something like respect. All right, Cruz, what are our assets? What can we liquefy quickly? Not enough, Cruz said bluntly. But maybe we don't need to raise all the money ourselves. Maybe we can get help. From who? Caleb demanded. Everyone in Redstone Flats is either afraid of Blackwood or in his pocket. Then we look beyond Redstone Flats, Lena said, her mind starting to work through possibilities. Neighboring towns, other ranchers, anyone who might have reason to stand against Blackwood's power. That's a lot of maybes, Cruz observed. Maybe is better than nothing, Lena replied. And right now, maybe is all we have. Noah tugged on her hand, and when she looked down, she saw determination in his young face that matched her own. This child had chosen her, had spoken for the first time in a year to claim her. She owed it to him to fight, to not give up just because the odds were impossible. All right, Caleb said, squaring his shoulders. We fight, all of us together. We find a way. They went back inside to begin planning, but Lena couldn't shake the memory of Blackwood's cold eyes, his absolute confidence that he would win in the end. 30 days. They had 30 days to achieve the impossible, to raise money they didn't have, to stand against the most powerful man in 3 counties. 30 days until everything fell apart, unless they found a miracle. The miracle didn't come in the first week, or the second. Caleb threw himself into work with desperate intensity, driving cattle to market in Santa Fe, negotiating with buyers who smelled his desperation and lowered their offers accordingly. Cruz rode to neighboring ranches, quietly asking for loans that never materialized. Everyone knew crossing Blackwood meant trouble. And trouble wasn't worth any amount of money. Lena wrote letters to the school board, to families she'd taught for, to anyone who might remember her kindness and be moved to help. The responses, when they came at all, were sympathetic but useless. Sorry to hear about your troubles. Wish we could help. Times are hard for everyone. By the 18th day, they'd managed to scrape together $243, less than half of what they needed, and time was running out like water through cupped hands. Lena stood at the kitchen window watching Noah play with a stick in the yard, drawing patterns in the dust. In 3 weeks, the boy had begun to emerge from his shell in small ways, helping with chores without being asked, attempting smiles that didn't quite form, staying close to her like she was a lifeline. Last night, she'd heard him humming while he fed the chickens, the first musical sound he'd made since his mother died. The progress was fragile and precious, and the thought of Blackwood destroying it made her physically ill. We're not going to make it, are we? She said quietly. Caleb stood at the table, surrounded by papers, bills, receipts, desperate calculations that refused to add up to salvation. He didn't answer immediately, but the slump of his shoulders told her everything. "I won't give up," he said finally. "There has to be something we haven't tried." "Like what?" "We've exhausted every option. We've sold everything that isn't essential to survival." Lena turned from the window to face him. "Maybe it's time to accept reality. Reality is that you're not going to Blackwood. I won't allow it. You won't have a choice. The contract is legal. When the payment comes due and you can't honor it, the law will enforce the transfer. Then we'll run." Caleb's voice was rough with emotion. "Take Noah. Head to California or Colorado. Start over somewhere Blackwood's reach doesn't extend. And abandon your ranch, your father's legacy, everything Cruz has worked to maintain?" Lena shook her head. "You'd be fugitives, always looking over your shoulder, always afraid. That's no life for Noah." "It's better than the alternative." "Is it?" Lena moved closer, forcing him to meet her eyes. "Or is it just another kind of cage? Running forever, never settling, teaching Noah that the solution to problems is to flee rather than face them?" Caleb's hands clenched into fists on the table. "What would you have me do? Hand you over? Pretend I did my best and wash my hands of the consequences?" "I would have you let me choose," Lena said quietly. "Let me decide what happens to my own life." The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Caleb stared at her, understanding dawning in his eyes, along with something that looked like horror. "No," he said flatly. "Absolutely not. I won't let you sacrifice yourself." "It's not sacrifice if it's my choice. You gave me agency when you bid for me, when you offered safety instead of ownership. Don't take that agency away now by deciding my fate without me." "Lena?" He rarely used her first name, and hearing it now made her chest tighten. "You don't understand what you'd be agreeing to. Blackwood isn't just cruel, he's dangerous. His previous wives, I know the rumors. Everyone knows the rumors." She kept her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her throat. "But this isn't about what I want. It's about what Noah needs. He's finally starting to heal, finally starting to feel safe. If you run, you'll undo all that progress. If you stay and lose the ranch, you'll lose his home, his stability, everything familiar. But if I go willingly to Blackwood, the debt is satisfied. You keep the ranch, Noah keeps his life." "And you lose everything," Caleb said, his voice breaking. "Your freedom, your safety, maybe your life. How is that acceptable?" "It's not. But it's the only option that protects the people I—" She stopped abruptly, shocked by what she'd almost said. The people she what? Cared about? Loved? How had that happened in 3 short weeks? But looking at Caleb's anguished face, at Noah playing innocently in the yard beyond the window, she realized it was true. Somewhere between the auction block and this moment, these broken strangers had become her family. The thought of leaving them hurt worse than anything Blackwood could do to her. Almost. "There has to be another way," Caleb insisted, but the defeat in his voice suggested he knew there wasn't. The sound of hoofbeats interrupted whatever Lena might have said. Both of them tensed automatically. Visitors meant trouble lately, but Cruz appeared in the doorway before alarm could fully form. "Someone's coming," he announced, "but not Blackwood. A woman, traveling alone. She's flying a white flag." Caleb and Lena exchanged confused glances. A white flag meant peace, negotiation, but who would be coming to negotiate? They went outside together, Noah abandoning his dust drawings to press against Lena's side. The rider crested the rise, and Lena felt her breath catch. Even from a distance, the woman's bearing spoke of wealth and refinement. She sat her horse like someone born to it, her dark riding habit expensive and well-tailored. As she drew closer, Lena could make out elegant features framed by silver-streaked black hair, and eyes that held both intelligence and something harder to define. Grief, maybe, or rage carefully controlled. The woman reined in her horse a respectful distance from the porch and studied them with frank appraisal. She was older than Lena had initially thought, perhaps 50, but age had refined rather than diminished her beauty. "Mr. Rowan?" Her voice was cultured, with a trace of an accent Lena couldn't quite place. "I apologize for arriving unannounced. My name is Victoria Blackwood." The name hit like a physical blow. Lena felt Caleb stiffen beside her, heard Cruz's sharp intake of breath. Thomas Blackwood's wife. One of them, anyway. The one who'd survived, though survival clearly came at a cost if the shadows in her eyes were any indication. "Mrs. Blackwood," Caleb said carefully, "this is unexpected." "I'm sure it is. May I dismount?" This conversation would be better conducted without an audience, and the hired hands watching from your barn have excellent hearing. It was true. Several of Cruz's men had materialized, drawn by curiosity or concern. Caleb nodded, and Cruz moved forward to help the woman down and take her horse. She moved with practiced grace, though Lena noticed the careful way she held her left side, as if something there pained her. "Perhaps we could speak inside," Victoria suggested, her gaze flickering to Noah. "Some matters are not suitable for young ears." They settled around the kitchen table, Lena having taken Noah to his room with a promise to return soon. When she rejoined the adults, Victoria was accepting a cup of coffee from Cruz with a small smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'll be direct," Victoria said once they were all seated. "I know about the debt, about the auction, about my husband's threat to take Miss Ashcroft when you default. I've come to offer assistance." Stunned silence greeted this announcement. Finally, Caleb found his voice. "Why would you help us? You're Blackwood's wife." "A fact I'm reminded of every day, I assure you." Victoria's tone was dry, bitter. "But being married to a monster doesn't make me complicit in his monstrousness. Not anymore." She set down her coffee cup with deliberate care. "My husband has many vices, Mr. Rowan, greed, cruelty, and insatiable appetite for control. But his greatest vice is pride. He cannot tolerate being defied, being denied something he wants. When you outbid him for Miss Ashcroft, you wounded that pride. He will not rest until he's destroyed you for it." "I'm aware," Caleb said grimly. "Are you? Are you truly aware of what he's capable of?" Victoria's composure cracked slightly, revealing raw pain beneath. "He killed his first wife. Everyone whispers about it, but no one dares speak it aloud. Elizabeth fell down the stairs after she tried to leave him. Convenient accident, the authorities said. His second wife, Margaret, disappeared during a trip to Santa Fe. Bandits, supposedly, though her body was never found and the bandits were never caught. I'm his third wife, purchased like livestock from my father to settle gambling debts. Sound familiar, Miss Ashcroft?" Lena felt ice in her veins. "How do you know about me?" "My husband is not subtle when he wants something. He's been ranting about you for 3 weeks, the pretty school teacher who dared look him in the eye, who didn't cower. He's already planning what he'll do when he gets you, how he'll break you, how he'll make you sorry you ever defied him." Victoria's hands trembled slightly as she clasped them on the table. "I won't let that happen. Not again. Not to another woman." "Why now?" Cruz asked quietly. "You've been his wife for how long? 5 years? Why help us now?" "Because I'm dying." The words fell like stones into still water. "Cancer. The doctor gives me 6 months, maybe less, and I've decided that if I must die, I'll die having done one good thing, one act of rebellion against the man who's made my life a living hell." The raw honesty silenced them all. Lena studied the woman across the table, the careful way she held herself, the pallor beneath her elegant composure, the fierce determination burning in eyes that had seen too much suffering. "What kind of assistance are you offering?" Caleb asked carefully. Victoria reached into her riding jacket and withdrew a leather pouch, setting it on the table with a heavy thunk. $300. Combined with what you've already raised, it should be enough to satisfy the debt. Caleb stared at the pouch like it might be a snake. "I can't take your money. If Blackwood finds out you helped us, he won't find out. This money came from my grandmother, left to me in a trust my husband cannot access. I've been saving it for years, waiting for the right moment to use it. This is that moment. But if he suspects, what will he do, kill me?" Victoria's laugh was harsh. "The cancer is doing that already. The only question is whether I die having mattered, having saved someone, or whether I die another of his victims. I choose to matter." Lena felt tears burning her eyes. This woman she'd never met, dying and desperate, offering salvation from a nightmare. "Why?" she whispered. "Why risk his rage for strangers?" Victoria's gaze met hers, and in those depths, Lena saw recognition, one survivor to another. Because 20 years ago, someone should have saved me, should have offered me an escape before my father sold me. But no one did. Everyone looked away, pretended not to see, told themselves it wasn't their problem. I won't be that person. I won't look away. She pushed the pouch toward Caleb. Take it. Use it. Free Miss Ashcroft from this burden. And when I'm gone, remember that sometimes the smallest acts of defiance echo loudest. There has to be another way, Caleb protested. Something we can do that doesn't put you in danger. I'm already in danger. I've been in danger since the day I married him. Victoria stood carefully, wincing slightly. The money is yours. I'll deny giving it if asked, and my husband has no way to prove otherwise. Accept this gift in the spirit it's offered, one broken soul trying to save another. She moved toward the door, but Lena stopped her with a hand on her arm. Come with us. Leave him. You don't have to go back there. For a moment, something like hope flickered across Victoria's face. Then it died, replaced by weary resignation. I have nowhere else to go. My family disowned me when I married Thomas. I have no money beyond what I've just given you, no skills for independent survival. And the cancer? She touched her side gently. I need the doctor's care, the medicine. Running would only hasten the inevitable. We could help you, Lena insisted. Find you somewhere safe, someone to care for you. You're kind. But some cages are built so thoroughly that escape becomes impossible. I accepted that long ago. Victoria smiled sadly. But you haven't accepted it, Miss Ashcroft. You're still fighting. Keep fighting. Don't let men like my husband convince you that surrender is inevitable. She left then, mounting her horse with Cruz's assistance and riding away without looking back. They watched until she disappeared over the rise, the dust of her passage settling slowly in the still air. Should we accept it? Caleb asked quietly. The money came from pain, from a dying woman's last rebellion. Does that make it wrong to use? It makes it precious, Lena said firmly. She gave us something invaluable, not just money, but choice, agency, the ability to determine our own futures. Refusing that gift would dishonor her courage. Cruz nodded slowly. La Señora's right. We take the money, we pay the debt, we survive. That's what Mrs. Blackwood wanted, for us to survive. Caleb picked up the leather pouch, weighing it in his hands. Inside was salvation and obligation mixed together, a gift purchased with suffering and offered with love. All right, he said finally. We accept. And we make damn sure her sacrifice means something. The next 3 days passed in a blur of activity. They counted the money obsessively, confirmed they had enough, prepared for the journey into Redstone Flats to settle the debt. Lena found herself simultaneously relieved and terrified. Relieved that Noah would keep his home, terrified of what Blackwood would do when he learned he'd been denied again. The night before they were scheduled to make the payment, Lena couldn't sleep. She stood at her window watching moonlight paint the desert silver, thinking about chains and freedom, about the high price both demanded. A soft knock made her turn. It's me, Caleb's voice came through the door. Can we talk? She opened the door to find him standing in the hallway, looking as sleepless as she felt. Can't sleep either? She asked. Too many thoughts, too much changing too fast. He gestured vaguely. Can I come in? I know it's not proper, but nothing about this situation is proper, Lena said, stepping back to let him enter. She left the door open. Propriety might be bent, but she wouldn't shatter it completely, and gestured to the chair while she sat on the bed. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other. Then Caleb spoke, his voice rough with emotion. I need you to know something before tomorrow, before we go into town and face whatever comes next. What? You've changed everything. In 3 weeks, you've brought life back to this house. Given Noah hope I thought he'd lost forever. Made me believe that maybe... He stopped, struggling for words. Made me believe that maybe broken things can heal. That maybe loss doesn't have to be the end of the story. Lena felt her throat tighten. You gave me back my humanity. When I stood on that auction block, I believed I was nothing more than property, something to be used and discarded. You proved me wrong. You treated me like a person with worth, with dignity, with the right to choose my own path. How do I thank someone for that? You don't. You just... Caleb leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands clasped. You just keep being who you are. Keep helping Noah. Keep filling this house with warmth. Keep existing, because your existence matters. Caleb, I need to say this. His eyes met hers, dark and intense in the moonlight. If things go badly tomorrow, if Blackwood finds some way to interfere, I want you to know that these 3 weeks have been the best I've had since Sarah died. You've given me back something I thought was gone forever. What's that? Hope, he said simply. The belief that tomorrow might be better than today. That's a gift beyond price, Lena. Whatever happens, thank you for that. She wanted to go to him, to close the distance between them, to acknowledge what was growing between them that neither dared name. But fear held her back. Fear that naming it would make it real, and making it real would give it the power to hurt when it inevitably ended. Because good things in her life always ended, always. We should sleep, she said instead, the words feeling cowardly. Tomorrow's going to be difficult. Caleb nodded and stood, but paused at the door. For what it's worth, I think you're the bravest person I've ever met. The way you've survived everything life threw at you, the way you stood tall, even in chains, that takes more courage than most people have in their entire lives. He left before she could respond, pulling the door closed softly behind him. Lena sat alone in the moonlight, his words echoing in the silence, and finally allowed herself to cry. Not from sadness, but from the overwhelming weight of being seen, truly seen, by someone who understood what it cost to keep standing when the world wanted you broken. Morning came too quickly. They dressed in their best clothes, Caleb in a suit that smelled of mothballs, Cruz in his Sunday vest, Lena in another of Sarah's dresses that she'd altered to fit better. Noah insisted on coming too, though Caleb tried to convince him to stay behind with one of the ranch hands. He should be there, Lena said quietly. He should see that we're fighting for his future, that we don't run from difficulty. Caleb relented, and they made the journey into Redstone Flats in tense silence. The town looked exactly as Lena remembered from that terrible day 3 weeks ago. Dusty streets, false-fronted buildings, people going about their business with carefully averted eyes. But this time, she wasn't in chains. This time, she walked in freely, her head high, flanked by people who'd chosen to stand with her. Cornelius Vance's office was above the general store. They climbed narrow stairs, Noah's hand tight in Lena's, and found the auctioneer behind a desk piled with papers. Mr. Rowan, Vance said, surprise evident in his voice. Didn't expect to see you today. Payment's not due until Monday. I'm aware. I'm here to pay early. Caleb set the leather pouch on the desk with a solid thunk. $501, as agreed. I want the contract satisfied and Miss Ashcroft's debt cleared. Vance's eyes widened. He opened the pouch and began counting, his expression growing more troubled with each bill. This is... Mr. Rowan, where did you get this money? That's my business. Is the amount correct? Yes, but... Vance looked genuinely disturbed. Mr. Blackwood isn't going to be happy about this. He was counting on your default. Again, not my concern. I'm paying the debt as agreed. That's legal and binding. Miss Ashcroft's obligation is fulfilled. Vance counted the money twice more, then pulled out a form and began filling it out with obvious reluctance. I'll need witnesses, 3 of them. We brought Cruz. Who else? I'll get Judge Morrison and Sheriff Garrett. Vance stood heavily. Wait here. He left, and they waited in tense silence. Cruz moved to the window, watching the street below with a hand near his pistol. Caleb stood behind Lena's chair, a silent support. Noah had climbed into Lena's lap, something he rarely did, his small body tense with anxiety he didn't fully understand. Footsteps on the stairs announced Vance's return, but he wasn't alone. Behind him came Judge Morrison, older, smaller than Lena remembered from the auction, with watery eyes and a weak chin, and Sheriff Garrett, still smelling of whiskey at 10 in the morning. But the fourth figure made Lena's blood freeze. Thomas Blackwood filled the doorway, his massive frame blocking the light from the stairs. His cold eyes swept the room, lingering on Lena with an expression that promised violence. Blackwood, Caleb said flatly. This doesn't concern you. Everything in this county concerns me. Blackwood entered the room, forcing everyone to shift to accommodate his presence, especially when someone tries to cheat me of what's rightfully mine. Nothing here is rightfully yours. The contract belongs to me, and I'm paying the debt. With stolen money. Blackwood's voice was ice. That money belongs to my wife. She had no right to give it away. Caleb's jaw tightened. The money came from Miss Ashcroft's teaching salary, saved over 3 years. Cruz and I can testify to that. It was a lie, but a necessary one. Lena held her breath, watching Blackwood's face darken with rage. He knew they were lying, knew exactly where the money came from, but he had no way to prove it. His wife had been too clever, covering her tracks too well. "You're lying," Blackwood snarled. "Prove it." Caleb's voice was steady. "Bring evidence that the money is stolen, otherwise accept that the debt is being paid and the contract is satisfied." For a long moment, Blackwood said nothing. Violence simmered in his eyes, barely controlled. Then Judge Morrison cleared his throat nervously. "Mr. Blackwood, if the money isn't proven stolen, I have to accept the payment. The law is clear." "The law is whatever I say it is," Blackwood shot back. "I own you, Morrison. Don't forget that." "Nevertheless," Morrison's voice shook, but he continued. "Nevertheless, I must follow proper procedure. If Mr. Rowan is paying the debt with apparently legitimate funds, I must witness and approve the transaction." Blackwood's hand moved toward his gun, and Cruz's hand matched the movement. The room held its breath, balanced on a knife's edge between peace and violence. Then Blackwood laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Fine. Take your victory, Rowan. Enjoy it while it lasts." His eyes found Lena again. "Because this isn't over. Not by a long shot. Accidents happen out here. Ranches burn. People disappear. You might have won today, but tomorrow? Tomorrow's a long way off, and I'm a patient man." He left, his footsteps heavy on the stairs. The threat lingered in the room like smoke, choking and real. But Vance, with trembling hands, completed the paperwork. Judge Morrison signed as witness. Sheriff Garrett added his scrawled signature, and then Vance was stamping the document with a heavy seal, making it official. "The debt is satisfied," he said quietly. "Miss Ashcroft's contract is fulfilled. She's legally free." Free. The word echoed in Lena's mind like a bell. She was free. Not owned, not bound, not property. For the first time in 3 weeks, the weight on her chest lifted slightly. "Thank you," Caleb said, taking the stamped document and folding it carefully. "We'll be going now." They descended the stairs and stepped into blinding sunlight. The street had emptied. Word of Blackwood's presence had spread quickly, and people had made themselves scarce. But as they walked toward their wagon, a figure emerged from the alley beside the general store. Mrs. Peterson, Lena's former landlady, the woman who'd watched from her window as Lena was dragged away. She stood wringing her hands, her face twisted with something that might have been shame. "Miss Ashcroft," she called, "might I have a word?" Lena wanted to refuse, wanted to walk past without acknowledgement, but something in the woman's expression made her pause. "What is it?" "I'm sorry." The words came out in a rush. "I'm so sorry for what happened to you, for not speaking up, for not defending you. I was afraid of making trouble, afraid of Blackwood, afraid of—" She stopped, tears streaming down her weathered face. "There's no excuse. I should have helped you. You were a good tenant, a good person, and I let them take you without saying a word." Lena stared at this woman who'd been a part of her daily life for 3 years, who'd accepted rent money with a smile and gossip over tea, who'd become a stranger the moment Lena needed help. Part of her wanted to rage, to make Mrs. Peterson feel the full weight of her betrayal. But another part, the part that had learned something about grace from Caleb's kindness, understood that fear made cowards of everyone. "I forgive you," Lena heard herself say, and was surprised to realize she meant it. Fear is powerful. It makes us smaller than we want to be. Mrs. Peterson's sobs intensified. "You're more generous than I deserve." Maybe, but maybe generosity is something we all need to practice more. Lena glanced at Caleb, at Noah, at the wagon waiting to take them home. "I have to go now, but thank you for the apology. It matters." They climbed into the wagon, and as Caleb guided the horses out of town, other people began appearing. The baker's wife, watching from her window with a hand raised in tentative greeting. Tom Ridley, stepping out of his smithy to nod respectfully. Families whose children Lena had taught, standing in doorways with expressions of relief and something that might have been shame, The town wasn't celebrating her freedom. They were too afraid of Blackwood for that. But they were acknowledging it, seeing it, bearing witness that one woman had survived their collective failure to protect her. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. But it was something. The ride back to the ranch was quiet until Noah, still sitting between them, reached up and touched Lena's face gently. She looked down to find him smiling, not almost smiling, not trying to smile, but actually smiling. The expression transformed his solemn little face, making him look like the child he should have been all along. "You're happy," she said softly. Noah nodded, and then in a voice rusty from disuse, but clear as a bell, spoke 3 words. "You're staying here." Lena's vision blurred with tears. Beside her, Caleb made a choked sound. Cruz, riding behind the wagon, let out a whoop of joy that startled the horses. "Yes," Lena whispered, pulling Noah close. "I'm staying, if you'll have me." Noah burrowed into her arms, and over his head, Lena met Caleb's eyes. What she saw there made her chest ache with possibility, hope and affection, and the fragile beginning of something neither of them had expected to find. The contract was satisfied. The debt was paid. She was legally free to leave, to return to teaching, to build whatever life she chose. But as the wagon rolled toward the ranch she'd begun to think of as home, Lena realized that freedom wasn't about having no obligations. It was about choosing which obligations mattered, which people deserved your loyalty, which love was worth fighting for. She'd been sold on an auction block 3 weeks ago, treated like property by people who should have protected her. But somewhere between that degradation and this moment, she'd found something more valuable than freedom. She'd found family. She'd found purpose. She'd found a place where broken things could heal together. And that, she was learning, was worth more than any price that could be paid or bargained for. That was worth everything. Hak den chua, Louis Chaloi Chong Muk Tin Yan Khom Nhai Sang document Heini Want to Khom Wat. But Blackwood's threat hung over them like storm clouds on the horizon, dark and inevitable. The first week after the debt was paid passed peacefully enough. Too peacefully, Cruz observed with the wariness of someone who'd learned that silence often preceded violence. They worked the ranch, fell into routines, and tried to pretend that danger wasn't circling closer with each passing day. Noah continued to emerge from his shell, speaking more frequently now, though never in long sentences. "Good morning" became part of his vocabulary. "I'm hungry," and "Can I help?" followed. Each word was a victory, and Lena treasured them like precious stones. But she noticed how the boy would sometimes freeze mid-sentence, listening for sounds that weren't there, watching the horizon for riders who hadn't yet come. He knew, as they all knew, that Blackwood wouldn't let this go. The fire came on the 8th night. Lena woke to the smell of smoke and Cruz's voice shouting in the yard. She stumbled from her room to find Caleb already dressed and moving, Noah clutched against his chest. Through the window she could see flames consuming the barn, orange light painting the night hellish and bright. "Get Noah to safety," Caleb ordered, thrusting the boy into her arms. "Take him to the root cellar behind the house and stay there until I come for you." "What about you?" "The horses are in that barn. I'm not letting them burn." He was gone before she could protest, Cruz right behind him. Lena ran with Noah through the back door, the boy's arms locked around her neck, his face buried against her shoulder. The root cellar was set into a hillside 20 yards from the house, its heavy wooden door hanging open like a mouth. She practically fell down the earthen steps, pulling Noah with her, and yanked the door shut behind them. Darkness swallowed them whole. Noah's breathing was rapid and panicked against her neck, small tremors running through his body. Lena felt along the wall until she found the lamp Cruz kept there, matches beside it. Her hands shook so badly it took 3 tries to light it, but finally weak light pushed back the shadows. "We're safe," she whispered to Noah, though she had no way of knowing if that was true. "Your father will come for us soon." Through the thick door she could hear shouting, the terrified screams of horses, the roar of flames. Every instinct screamed at her to go help, but she had Noah to protect. She couldn't risk him. So she held the boy in the darkness and waited, counting her heartbeats, marking time in shallow breaths. Minutes stretched into eternities. Then, finally, footsteps approached the cellar. Lena tensed, reaching for anything she could use as a weapon, but Caleb's voice called out, "Lena!" It's me! She threw open the door to find him silhouetted against the dying flames, his face blackened with soot, his shirt singed in places. Behind him, the barn was a skeleton of charred timber, still smoking but no longer actively burning. The horses? Lena asked, though she dreaded the answer. We got them out. All of them. Cruz is checking them for injuries now. Caleb sagged against the doorframe, exhaustion written in every line of his body. It was arson. Someone poured kerosene around the foundation and lit it. If Cruz hadn't been doing a final check of the animals, if he'd been asleep like he should have been, we'd have lost everything. Noah had gone rigid in Lena's arms at the word arson, understanding enough to be frightened. She held him tighter, meeting Caleb's eyes over the boy's head. Blackwood, she said. It wasn't a question. Has to be. No one else has reason to want me destroyed. Caleb's hands clenched into fists. But I can't prove it. He'll have made sure there's no evidence tying back to him. So what do we do? I don't know. The admission seemed torn from him. Station guards every night? Live in constant fear? How is that any kind of life for Noah? As if hearing his name summoned courage, Noah lifted his head from Lena's shoulder. His young face was tear-streaked and soot-smudged, but his expression held determination that seemed far too old for 7 years. Make him stop, Noah said, his voice clearer than Lena had yet heard it. Tell everyone. Make them see. Lena and Caleb exchanged glances. Out of the mouths of children came terrible wisdom, and in this case, perhaps the only solution. Blackwood's power rested on fear and secrecy, on people looking away and pretending not to see his crimes. But what if they forced people to look? What if they made his evil so public, so undeniable, that even the cowards had to take a stand? He's right, Lena said slowly, the plan forming even as she spoke. We can't fight Blackwood with force. He has too many men, too much money. But we can fight him with truth, with witnesses, with the one thing men like him fear most. What's that? Accountability. They spent the rest of the night putting out hotspots and checking the animals. As dawn broke over the ranch, painting the destroyed barn in unforgiving light, they gathered around the kitchen table to plan. Cruz joined them, his face grim, but his eyes sharp with approval when he heard what they intended. It's risky, he observed. Blackwood won't take kindly to being exposed. He's already trying to destroy us, Caleb pointed out. How much riskier can it get? Fair point. Cruz poured coffee for everyone, the familiar ritual grounding them in normalcy even as they plotted something extraordinary. So, how do we do this? We can't just stand in the town square and start making accusations. Half the people will ignore us, and the other half will call us liars. We need proof, Lena said. Not of the fire. You're right, he'll have covered those tracks, but of his other crimes. His previous wives, the threats he's made, the way he's controlled this county through fear. Someone must know something. Someone must be willing to speak. Victoria, Caleb said suddenly. Victoria Blackwood knows everything. She lived with him for 5 years. She must have seen things, heard things. She's dying, Lena reminded him gently. And she's terrified of him. All the more reason she might talk. What does she have to lose now? Caleb stood abruptly, energized by purpose. I'm going to ride out to the Blackwood Ranch today. Try to speak with her. That's insane, Cruz protested. Walking onto Blackwood's property? He'll shoot you on sight. Not if I go during the day when he's likely to be in town. Not if I make it clear I'm just there to check on Mrs. Blackwood after hearing she's ill. Caleb's jaw set stubbornly. It's a risk, but everything's a risk now. Then I'm going with you, Lena said. Absolutely not. You'll need a witness if she does talk. And she's more likely to speak to another woman, someone who understands what she's endured. Lena stood to face him, matching his stubbornness with her own. I'm going, Caleb. You can't stop me. They stared at each other, locked in a battle of wills, until Noah's small voice broke the standoff. Both go. I stay with Cruz. Be safe. The simple faith in his words undid them both. Caleb reached out and pulled his son into a tight embrace. We'll be safe, I promise. Don't make promises you can't keep, Noah said solemnly, and Lena felt her heart break a little. This child had lost too much already to believe in guarantees. 2 hours later, Lena and Caleb rode toward the Blackwood Ranch on their best horses, both of them dressed as respectably as possible, both carrying the careful courtesy of social callers. The Blackwood property sprawled across a valley 10 miles east, a monument to wealth extracted from the suffering of others. The house itself was a 2-story mansion, absurdly grand for frontier standards, with white columns and a sweeping veranda that belonged in Virginia, not New Mexico. They were stopped at the gate by 2 armed men who regarded them with undisguised suspicion. "State your business," the larger one demanded. "We're here to call on Mrs. Blackwood," Caleb said calmly. "We heard she's been unwell and wanted to pay our respects." "Mr. Blackwood ain't home. We're not here to see Mr. Blackwood. We're here to see his wife." The guards exchanged glances, uncertain. Social calls weren't typically their concern, and turning away respectable-looking visitors could anger their employer. Finally, the smaller one shrugged. "Wait here, I'll ask." He disappeared toward the house, leaving them to wait in uncomfortable silence with the remaining guard. Lena took the opportunity to study the property. The manicured gardens that must require constant watering in this arid climate, the stables that could house 50 horses, the bunkhouses for the army of men Blackwood employed, all of it bought with cruelty, built on the broken backs of people with no power to resist. The guard returned with a woman in a servant's uniform. "Mrs. Blackwood will receive you in the garden," she announced. "Please follow me." They were led around the side of the house to a garden shaded by cottonwood trees, where Victoria Blackwood sat in a wicker chair with a blanket across her lap despite the heat. She looked frailer than she had 2 weeks ago, her skin nearly translucent, her elegant bones too prominent, but her eyes were sharp and knowing when they landed on her visitors. "Mr. Rowan, Miss Ashcroft," her voice was barely above a whisper. "I wasn't expecting to see you again." "I apologize for the intrusion," Caleb said, removing his hat. "But we need your help." "I've already helped you all I can." Victoria gestured weakly toward chairs. "Please, sit. And you," she addressed the servant, "leave us. Close the garden gate behind you." Once they were alone, Victoria studied them with those knowing eyes. "The fire last night. My husband came home smelling of smoke and satisfaction. It was him, wasn't it?" "We can't prove it," Lena said. "But yes, we believe so." "Of course it was him. He told me at breakfast that you'd regret defying him, that by summer's end your ranch would be ash and you'd be begging in the streets." Victoria's hands trembled slightly on the blanket. "He's escalating. That means he's planning something worse." "That's why we're here," Caleb said. "We need evidence, testimony, something that will force the authorities to act, that will make people see what he really is." Victoria laughed, the sound hollow and bitter. "The authorities? Judge Morrison is in his pocket. Sheriff Garrett is terrified of him. The mayor owes him money. There are no authorities to appeal to, Mr. Rowan, not in Redstone Flats." "Then we go higher, to the territorial governor, to federal marshals, but we need proof first." Lena leaned forward urgently. "You said he killed his first wife, that the second one disappeared. You must know details. You must have seen things." "I've seen many things." Victoria's gaze went distant. "I've seen him beat servants for minor infractions. I've seen him threaten men into selling their land for pennies on the dollar. I've watched him destroy anyone who dared oppose him, but seeing and proving are different things." "We need you to testify," Caleb pressed, "to make a formal statement about his crimes, even if it's just about the threats he's made, the fear he's created. Combined with our own testimony, it might be enough to bring real authorities to investigate." "And if I testify, what happens? He'll kill me before I can finish speaking." "You said you're dying anyway," Lena said gently. "You said you wanted to die having mattered. This is how you matter, Victoria. This is how you save not just me, but every woman who might come after us." Victoria's eyes filled with tears. "You don't understand what you're asking. It's not death I fear. It's what comes before death. Thomas is creative in his cruelty. He'll make sure I suffer." "Then leave. Now. Come with us. We'll protect you." "With what? 2 people and a dying woman against Thomas Blackwood's small army?" Victoria shook her head. "I'm not brave enough for that." "You were brave enough to give us the money to pay our debt," Lena countered. You were brave enough to defy him in secret. Be brave enough to defy him in the light. They sat in silence, the only sound the rustle of cottonwood leaves in the hot breeze. Finally, Victoria spoke, her voice so soft they had to lean in to hear. There's a box in my bedroom, hidden beneath a loose floorboard under the wardrobe. In that box are letters. Letters from Elizabeth, Thomas's first wife, to her sister. Letters describing the abuse, the fear, the threats. Elizabeth's sister sent them to me after Thomas and I married, hoping I could use them somehow. I've kept them hidden all these years, afraid to act but unable to destroy them. Caleb's expression hardened with new determination. Can you get them for us? I can't walk that far anymore. The cancer has spread to my bones. I can barely make it from my bed to this chair. Victoria's voice broke. But if you could get into the house, into my room, that's breaking and entering, Lena said. We'd be criminals. You'd be survivors, Victoria corrected. And those letters are my property to give. I'm giving them to you. The only question is whether you're brave enough to take them. Lena looked at Caleb, seeing her own fear and determination reflected in his face. They'd come this far. They'd survived the auction block, the debt, the fire. What was one more risk weighed against the possibility of finally ending Blackwood's reign of terror? How do we get in? Caleb asked. Victoria's smile was grim. Thomas is in town today, meeting with the banker. He won't be back until sunset. The servants take their rest period between 2 and 3. The house will be mostly empty. My room is on the second floor, third window from the right. There's a trellis beneath it that will support your weight if you're careful. You've thought about this before, Lena observed. I've thought about many ways to defy him. I just never had the courage to act. Victoria reached out and gripped Lena's hand with surprising strength. Be my courage. Take the letters. Make sure the world knows what he is. They left her in his garden, walking back through the property with forced casualness, nodding politely to the guards at the gate. But once they were out of sight of the ranch, they circled back, leaving their horses tied in a grove of trees and approaching the house on foot. The mansion loomed above them, white and imposing in the afternoon sun. Lena's heart hammered as they crept along the side of the house, counting windows. Third from the right. The trellis was sturdy enough, thick vines wound around wooden lattice, but it creaked ominously when Caleb tested his weight on it. I'll go, Lena whispered. I'm lighter. If you get caught, then we're no worse off than we already are. She gathered her skirts and began to climb before courage could desert her. The trellis held, though every sound seemed impossibly loud in the stillness of the afternoon. She climbed carefully, testing each handhold, trying to ignore the drop below that grew with each foot gained. Finally, she reached the window and found it mercifully unlocked. She eased it open and slipped inside, landing softly on thick carpet. Victoria's room was beautiful and suffocating at once. Expensive furnishings and heavy draperies, but bars on the windows and a lock on the door that could only be engaged from outside. A gilded cage for a woman who'd never been free. Lena found the wardrobe and dragged it aside enough to access the floor beneath. Sure enough, one of the boards was loose. She pried it up with shaking fingers and found a small wooden box underneath. Inside were letters, dozens of them, the paper yellowed with age. She didn't have time to read them, just gathered them all and tucked them into the bodice of her dress. Then she replaced the floorboard, repositioned the wardrobe, and turned toward the window, and froze. A man stood in the doorway. Not Blackwood, but one of his guards, the larger one from the gate. His expression was confused, then understanding, then hardening with purpose. Thief, he said simply, and reached for the gun at his hip. Lena didn't think, just acted. She grabbed a heavy candlestick from the dresser and threw it with all her strength. It caught him in the shoulder, not enough to do real damage, but enough to startle. She was at the window before he recovered, out onto the trellis, sliding more than climbing down. Run! She shouted to Caleb, who'd been waiting below. He saw me! They ran, crashing through brush and jumping obstacles, the guards' shouts raising an alarm behind them. More men appeared, pouring from the bunkhouse. Gunshots cracked through the air, and Lena felt something tug at her skirt, a bullet passing too close. They reached the horses and mounted in one fluid motion born of desperation. Caleb kicked his horse into a gallop, Lena right behind him, and they fled across the valley with Blackwood's men in pursuit. The chase lasted forever and no time at all. Lena's horse was fast, bred for speed rather than endurance, and slowly they pulled ahead. The sounds of pursuit faded behind them, though they didn't slow until they were miles away and certain no one was following. Finally, gasping and shaking, they pulled up in a hollow hidden from the trail. Caleb was off his horse immediately, pulling Lena down and into his arms, checking her frantically for injuries. "I'm fine," she managed, though her voice shook. "I'm fine. I got them." She pulled the letters from her bodice, and they looked at the bundle of paper that had nearly cost Lena her life. Proof. Evidence. Hope. "We need to get these to Santa Fe," Caleb said, "to the territorial governor. This is federal jurisdiction if Blackwood murdered his wife." "He'll come after us," Lena said. "After what just happened, he'll know we have something. He'll come with everything he has." "Then we move fast." Caleb's jaw set with determination. "Tonight. We ride to Santa Fe tonight, deliver these letters, bring back federal marshals. It's our only chance." They made it back to the ranch as the sun was setting, finding Cruz and Noah watching anxiously from the porch. The story tumbled out in a rush. The letters, the chase, the narrowness of their escape. Cruz's expression grew grimmer with each word. "Blackwood knows you have evidence against him now," he said. "He'll move tonight to destroy it in you. We need to prepare for a siege." "No." Caleb shook his head. "Lena and I ride for Santa Fe. Now. You and Noah go to the Mendoza ranch. Your cousin will shelter you. If Blackwood comes here and finds the place empty, he'll have no one to hurt. And leave you to ride alone? That's suicide. We don't have a choice. Those letters are the only thing that can stop him, but they're useless if they burn with us." Caleb gripped Cruz's shoulder. "Please, protect my son. That's all that matters." Cruz looked like he wanted to argue, but finally nodded. "Go. We'll leave within the hour, but Caleb," his voice roughened with emotion, "you come back alive. That boy has lost enough." They gathered supplies quickly, working with the efficiency of people who knew time was running out. Lena changed into riding clothes, men's trousers and a shirt, scandalous but practical. She strapped on a gun belt with a pistol Cruz pressed into her hands, along with quick instructions on how to use it. Noah clung to her when it was time to leave, his small body shaking. "Don't go," he whispered. "Stay safe here." "I can't, sweetheart, but I will come back. I promise." She met Caleb's eyes over the boy's head, acknowledging the lie. She couldn't promise any such thing. "Your father and I are going to make sure the bad men can't hurt anyone anymore." "Like Mama?" Noah's voice was tiny. "She said she'd come back too." Lena's heart shattered. She knelt so she was eye level with him, taking his face in her hands. "Your mama didn't leave you on purpose. She fought to stay, but sometimes sickness is too strong. I'm not sick, and I'm going to fight just as hard to come back. Can you be brave for me? Can you take care of Cruz until we return?" Noah nodded, tears streaming down his face. But when he spoke, his voice was steady. "I'll be brave. You be brave too." "I will. I promise you that much." They left as full dark descended, riding hard under a sky full of stars. The trail to Santa Fe would take them through rough country, arroyos and mesas, places where ambush was easy and help was non-existent. But they pushed on, driven by urgency and the knowledge that behind them, Blackwood's men were likely already riding. They'd been traveling for perhaps 2 hours when they heard it. Hoofbeats, multiple riders, coming fast from behind. "They're on us," Caleb said grimly. "We need to find defensible ground." They urged their horses faster, but the terrain was unfamiliar in darkness, treacherous with hidden obstacles. The sounds of pursuit grew louder. Then, ahead, Lena spotted something, a cluster of rocks forming a natural fortress, barely visible in the starlight. "There!" She pointed, and they made for it. They reached the rocks with perhaps 2 minutes to spare. They dismounted, slapped the horses to send them running, no point in giving Blackwood's men easy targets, and took up positions in the rocks, guns drawn. The riders appeared moments later, 6 of them, led by Blackwood himself on that massive black stallion. They pulled up short when they saw the defensive position, spreading out to surround the rocks. "Rowan!" Blackwood's voice boomed through the darkness. "You've made your last mistake. Hand over those letters, and maybe I'll let you die quick." "Go to hell," Caleb shouted back. I'll burn you out. I'll make you watch each other die slowly. I'll... His threats were cut off by the sound of more hoofbeats, many more, coming from the direction of Santa Fe. Everyone froze, confused, as dozens of riders emerged from the darkness, surrounding Blackwood's small group. At their head was a man in a dark suit wearing a silver star on his vest. A federal marshal, Lena realized with shock. But how? Thomas Blackwood! The marshal's voice rang with authority. You're under arrest for the murder of Elizabeth Blackwood, for conspiracy to defraud, and for attempted murder. Drop your weapons. On whose authority? Blackwood demanded, but his voice had lost its confidence. On the authority of the United States government and the testimony of your wife, Victoria Blackwood. The marshal gestured, and two riders moved forward, supporting between them a frail figure wrapped in blankets. Victoria. She'd somehow gotten to Santa Fe ahead of them, somehow found the strength to make the journey and testify. Blackwood's face contorted with rage. That lying bitch! I'll kill her! I'll kill all of you! He went for his gun, but he was surrounded, outmatched. His own men, seeing the federal force arrayed against them, dropped their weapons without hesitation. Only Blackwood fought, and it took 3 marshals to subdue him, his roars of rage echoing across the desert. The head marshal approached Lena and Caleb's position. Mr. Rowan? Miss Ashcroft? I'm Marshal William Hayes. Mrs. Blackwood arrived in Santa Fe yesterday and made a full confession regarding her husband's crimes. When she learned you'd gone to retrieve additional evidence, I gathered my men and rode to intercept. Seems we arrived just in time. Lena emerged from the rocks on shaking legs, hardly daring to believe it was over. How did she get to Santa Fe? She could barely walk. Sheer determination, from what I understand. She hired a wagon, bribed a driver to take her through the night, nearly killed her making the journey, but she insisted. Hayes' expression was respectful. She's a remarkable woman. Between her testimony and those letters you're carrying, we have more than enough to see Blackwood hang. They made the journey back to Redstone Flats in a strange caravan, federal marshals, prisoners, and 2 exhausted people who could hardly believe they'd survived. Victoria rode in a wagon, barely conscious, but alive. When Lena climbed in beside her, the older woman's eyes fluttered open. Did you get them? She whispered. The letters? We got them. It's over. He's arrested. You did it, Victoria. You stopped him. Victoria's smile was peaceful. I mattered then. At the end, I mattered. You always mattered. Every person matters. Thank you for showing me that. Victoria's eyes closed again. Thank you for giving me courage when I thought I had none left. The news spread through Redstone Flats like wildfire. Thomas Blackwood, the most powerful man in 3 counties, arrested for murder. His reign of terror ended. By the time they arrived in town, the streets were lined with people, not celebrating exactly, but present, witnessing, acknowledging what had happened. Judge Morrison stood on the steps of his office, his face gray with shame. Miss Ashcroft, he called out, I owe you an apology. I let fear make me complicit in injustice. I'm sorry. Sheriff Garrett appeared beside him, removing his hat. We all owe you an apology. You deserved better from this town. More voices joined in, people stepping forward to admit their failures, their cowardice, their shame at looking away when someone needed help. It wasn't enough. Could never be enough to erase what had happened. But it was acknowledgement. It was the beginning of change. They collected Noah and Cruz from the Mendoza ranch the next day, the reunion tearful and joyous. Noah threw himself into Lena's arms with such force he nearly knocked her down, and she held him like she'd never let go. You came back, he said wonderingly. You kept your promise. Always, she whispered. I'll always come back to you. Over his head, she met Caleb's eyes and saw reflected there everything she felt. Relief, exhaustion, and something deeper that neither had named yet, but both recognized. Victoria died 3 days later, peacefully in a hospital bed in Santa Fe with Lena holding her hand. Her last words were, Tell other women they don't have to accept cages. Tell them they can fight. I will, Lena promised. I'll tell them your story. I'll make sure they know what you did. They buried Victoria in a proper cemetery with a proper headstone that read, Victoria Blackwood, she fought. Not the most poetic epitaph, but honest, and honesty was what Victoria had craved most in life. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Blackwood tried every trick, bribes, threats, appeals to his supposed importance, but the evidence was overwhelming, the testimony damning. Elizabeth's letters described in heartbreaking detail the abuse she'd suffered, the threats Blackwood made, her certainty that he would kill her if she tried to leave. Victoria's testimony corroborated everything, adding her own experiences and knowledge of Margaret's disappearance. The jury deliberated for less than an hour, guilty on all counts. Thomas Blackwood was sentenced to hang. Lena didn't attend the execution. Neither did Caleb or Noah. They'd had enough of witnessing death, of being defined by violence and trauma. Instead, on the day Blackwood died, they worked together to repair the barn, rebuilding what had been destroyed, creating something new from ashes. As summer faded into fall, life began to establish new rhythms. Noah started speaking in full sentences, then paragraphs, then couldn't seem to stop talking, making up for a year of silence with constant chatter that Caleb and Lena found endlessly delightful. He started sleeping through the night without nightmares, started smiling freely, started being a child again. The ranch prospered in ways it hadn't for years. With Blackwood gone, other ranchers felt safe enough to do honest business. Fair prices were negotiated, cooperation replaced competition, and the community began to heal from the poison one man had injected into it. Mrs. Peterson appeared at the ranch one October morning with a basket of fresh bread and tears in her eyes. "I don't expect forgiveness," she told Lena, "but I wanted you to know I'm selling my boarding house and using the money to establish a fund for women in trouble. So maybe next time someone will have somewhere to go. Someone will have options." Other people followed: the baker's wife, who organized a women's association to support each other; Tom Ridley, who established fair wage standards for workers, families who'd once looked away now actively building a better community. Change, Lena learned, started with one person refusing to accept injustice, but it spread when others found the courage to join them. On a cool November afternoon, as golden light slanted across the repaired barn and the sound of cattle lowing drifted on the breeze, Caleb found Lena sitting on the porch watching Noah play with a puppy Cruz had brought home. "Can I join you?" he asked. "It's your porch," she replied with a smile. He sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. They'd been dancing around this for months. The attraction, the affection, the way they fit together like pieces of a puzzle neither had known was incomplete. "I've been thinking," Caleb said slowly, "about the future, about what comes next. And I realize you're free now, truly free. The debt is paid, the contract is satisfied, you can go anywhere, do anything. Return to teaching if you want. Go to California, whatever you choose." Lena's heart sank. Was he asking her to leave? "But," Caleb continued, taking her hand carefully, "I'm hoping you'll choose to stay. Not because you owe me anything, not because you're bound by any legal contract, but because you want to. Because this feels like home to you the way it does to me." "Caleb, let me finish," he said softly. "I'm not asking you to stay as a housekeeper or a nanny or anything practical. I'm asking you to stay as family, as my partner, as, if you'll have me, my wife." The word hung in the air between them, full of possibility and promise. Lena felt tears welling up, but for the first time in months, they were tears of joy. "I need you to understand something," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm not the same woman I was before the auction. That experience changed me, made me harder in some ways, more cautious, less willing to trust easily. I know. And I need you to know that if I say yes, it's not because I need rescuing or because I'm grateful you saved me. It's because I've fallen in love with you and Noah. Because this ranch has become home, not because I have nowhere else to go, but because nowhere else feels right." Caleb's face broke into a smile that transformed him. "Is that a yes?" "That's a yes." Lena laughed through her tears. "Yes, I'll marry you. Yes, I'll stay. Yes to all of it." He kissed her then, gentle and questioning at first, then deeper as she responded. When they finally broke apart, they found Noah standing at the bottom of the porch steps, grinning so wide his face might split. "Does this mean Lena's my mama now?" he asked hopefully. "If she's willing," Caleb said, looking at Lena. "I'm willing," she whispered. I'm so very willing. Noah whooped with joy and launched himself at them, and they caught him together, the three of them tangled in an embrace that felt like wholeness, like healing, like coming home after a long journey through darkness. The wedding took place on a Sunday afternoon in late November, officiated by a circuit judge who happened to be passing through. It wasn't a grand affair, no fancy dresses or elaborate decorations, but what it lacked in pomp, it made up for in meaning. The entire town came. Mrs. Peterson and the baker's wife stood as witnesses. Tom Ridley and Cruz served as best men, arguing good-naturedly about who got to stand where. Noah carried the rings on a pillow he'd embroidered himself, uneven stitches but made with love. They married not in a church, but in the open air, on a stretch of land near the ranch where prairie grass grew tall and mountains rose purple in the distance. The same landscape where Lena had first arrived in chains, terrified and broken. The same land where she'd learned that kindness existed, that healing was possible, that chosen family could be stronger than blood. As Caleb slipped the simple gold band onto her finger and spoke vows that promised partnership rather than ownership, equality rather than servitude, Lena felt something shift inside her. The last chains, the invisible ones she'd been carrying, finally fell away. She wasn't defined by what had been done to her. She wasn't limited by other people's cruelty or failures. She was Lena Ashcroft Rowan, wife and mother and survivor, and she'd earned every bit of joy this moment held. "I love you," Caleb whispered against her lips after the judge pronounced them married. "Thank you for choosing us." "Thank you for showing me that choice was possible," she whispered back. The celebration lasted into the evening. Food and music, dancing and laughter, the kind of joy that comes from surviving something terrible and deciding to embrace life anyway. Noah danced until he could barely stand, then fell asleep in Lena's arms while the adults continued celebrating around them. Later, much later, when the guests had gone and the house was quiet, Lena stood at the window of what was now their shared bedroom, looking out at the star-filled sky. Caleb came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Any regrets?" he asked softly. "None," she said honestly. "This isn't the life I imagined for myself, but it's better. It's real and hard and beautiful, and it's mine, truly mine, in a way nothing's ever been before." "Ours," he corrected gently. "It's ours." She turned in his arms to face him. "Yes, ours. I like the sound of that." They stood together in the darkness, two broken people who'd found a way to be whole together, who'd learned that the strongest foundations were built not on perfection, but on honesty, on choosing each other daily, on refusing to let cruelty have the final word. Outside, the desert stretched endlessly under a canopy of stars. The same desert where Lena had once been paraded in chains, where she'd been sold like property, where she'd believed her story was ending. But stories, she'd learned, were strange things. They twisted and turned in unexpected ways. They broke your heart and then filled it again. They took you to the darkest places imaginable and then showed you light you never knew existed. Her story wasn't over, it was just beginning, and this time she was writing it herself. Years later, when people asked how they met, Lena would tell the truth about the auction block, the chains, the public humiliation. She never softened it or made it more palatable. The story needed to be told honestly so that people understood what she'd survived, what she'd overcome. But she also told them about Caleb stepping forward with Noah's hand in his, about choosing hope over cynicism, about Victoria's courage and a community learning to do better. She told them that survival wasn't about being unbroken, but about deciding what you built from the pieces. And when women came to her, because they did come, drawn by her story, seeking advice or shelter, or just the comfort of someone who understood, she told them what Victoria had asked her to share. You don't have to accept cages. You don't have to stay in situations that diminish you. You don't have to be grateful for scraps when you deserve feasts. Fight. Choose yourself, demand better, and know that on the other side of that fight, there might be something more beautiful than you can imagine. Some listened, some didn't, but Lena kept speaking anyway, kept offering hope to women who'd forgotten it existed, kept being living proof that a woman sold on an auction block could become a woman who owned her own life. In the end, that was her victory. Not that she'd escaped Blackwood, though she had. Not that she'd found love, though she had. but that she'd taken the worst moment of her life and transformed it into fuel for building something better. She'd been auctioned in chains while people laughed, but she'd stood tall anyway, chosen hope anyway, fought back anyway, and that made all the difference.